Ladies and gents, he has achieved liftoff. A cannabis edible trip report by DBLR, posted at earwid.org October 14th, 2022. Consciousness. This has always been a topic of intrigue to me. In particular, ways and means of exploring and mapping states of consciousness to ordinary reality. The first reason, I pursue it for personal or spiritual growth. The second reason, practical knowledge in creating an artificially conscious mind, i.e., real artificial intelligence. In regards to personal or spiritual growth, I consider myself a spiritual person, but I don't subscribe to any religion. I've had mystical experiences in my teens, when I was a Christian, and similarly had mystical experiences in my 30s, without identifying with any religion. Consequently, I view psychoactive substances, shamanism, language, real-life experiences, etc. as useful tools in understanding consciousness and navigating the human experience. Despite the knowledge of the effects of psychoactive substances from researching the experiences of dedicated psychonauts, I rarely engage with any substances. I practice the art of flying with my feet firmly planted on the ground, which is a way of altering my reality through real-life experiences without the use of mind-altering drugs. With that said, I have previously taken a functional approach to CBD some years ago as a substitute for massages. This was solely for use after long and intense cycling training efforts, as it worked as a great muscle relaxer for me. I have used CBD maybe 2 to 3 times in the last 2 to 3 years, once to enhance a sexual experience, and the other to try and relax my body after some long COVID issues. Onto my experience. I'd recently had dental surgery. The dentist offered me Norco, an opioid, to address the pain. However, I politely declined but accepted ibuprofen, Motrin, instead. I had similarly declined being put to sleep for the surgery. As previously mentioned, I choose to navigate life in its rawness as much as I can, without the numbing effects of alcohol or psychoactives. This was a big mistake on my part. The pain was excruciating, and I almost went into a state of delirium as a result of the pain back at my place. At the tail end of the recovery process, I decided to introduce CBD to speed up the process, particularly in relaxing my jaws. I bought some hemp-derived CBD gummies with less than 0.3% of Delta-9 THC. They contained 15 mg of THC and 15 mg CBD per gummy. Aside from that, the ingredient list states that they contain sodium citrate, buffered pectin, natural flavour, natural colour, distilled water, granulated sugar, citric acid, hemp seed oil, 43DE tapioca syrup. The person at the shop that sold it me had asked what I needed it for. I mentioned the pain from dental surgery, and maybe to relax a bit, in which case he suggested those particular gummies. I rarely use THC, as it has given me headaches and feelings of paranoia in the past. It was a Friday on September at 7:30 PM when I took the gummies. I had taken a single gummy the previous Saturday and simply fell asleep. I'd therefore committed to taking 2 gummies for the best possible outcome. At the time, I was upstairs in my bedroom getting ready to jump into bed for some reading. I am a hermit by nature, and therefore it was unlikely that there would be any distraction. If you were curious as to why I was getting into bed that early on a Friday, well, blame that on long COVID. I caught the first wave of COVID in February 2020, and it's significantly affected my quality of life since. I got into bed, bit off half a gummy, and started reading. I was reading Be Here Now by Ram Dass. I had read it some years ago, and bits of it resonated with me at the time. I had somewhat felt inclined to pick it up off my bookshelf a couple of weeks earlier for no apparent reason. At the 8 PM mark, I took another half gummy. I kept on reading, but at some point, it became apparent that I wasn't making much progress. I was reading the same sentence over and over again. I haven't meditated in a long time, but it occurred to me in that moment to do so as the gummies started to kick in. So off the bed, and onto the floor I was, setting myself up for meditation. I was uncomfortable, as I can barely hold a lotus position due to my long-leggedness. The lights in my bedroom were still on. I turned around, picked up the other gummy, and bit off half of it. This is likely within the 8 to 9 PM window. About 10 minutes later, I decided to eat the remaining half gummy, turn off the lights, and commit to the meditation. The discomfort of the floor and lotus position forced me back onto the bed. I would meditate in the dark, laying on my back on the bed. However, the meditation was rapidly going nowhere. Rather, strange feelings of paranoia started kicking in. There were voices and songs in my head, and I realised that this is what it's like to go mad. Check please. This is not what I had signed up for whatsoever. The thing with the drug-induced paranoia is that it doesn't just go away because it's no longer convenient for me to experience it. If anything, it became an echo chamber for experiencing even more paranoia. I decided to quickly manage my state. I got up, turned on the lights, and sat at the edge of my bed trying to meditate again. The feeling of paranoia, or rather something being off, was increasing. I opened my eyes, looked around, and the wall above my closet seemed to be melting, but it looked sinister in my state of mind. More of an energetic sinister than visual sinister though. I got up, took myself to the bathroom, faced the mirror, and tried to reassure myself that all was well. While in the bathroom, my legs started feeling weak. The state of paranoia was still persistent, and particularly the feeling that I was going to die. At this point, I knew I was in trouble. I was having a bad trip and there was no way out. I could barely manage my mental state. Help is what I really needed, short of going mad. The switch was almost being flipped, and you would find me in your local neighbourhood, half naked, or naked, raving about how Jesus came to shave your chin because your mother loves goats, or something similar. I went back to my bedroom, picked up my phone, and typed a message. Send 911. This was a message to a friend that I can trust with my life. However, I didn't actually press send in the end. For one, she's out of state, and two, she would have no idea why, and trying to text back and forth at my mental state at the time would have been a chore. I left the message there as a safety net. I would call 911 by myself if I need to. I put on some pants, went to the bathroom, brushed my hair, and then went downstairs. The first thing I did was to unlock the door as I was feeling that I was about to pass out. I was rapidly losing motor control, and therefore I decided to write a note regarding what happened. I picked up a piece of mail and tried to write what had happened on the back of it, and was barely able to write the words. Too much. Underneath those words, I drew an arrow and wrote the number 2, indicating the number of gummies I had taken. I picked up the pack of gummies and the note and wanted to go to the next door to my neighbours and ring their doorbell. However, my motor control was still rapidly deteriorating, and therefore I opted for the couch, sat on it. I lay on the couch for a bit to see if it got better, and looked at the time and it said it was 9:38 PM. After what seemed like hours later, I looked at the time and it was only 9:41 PM. That's it, it was time for 911. I dialed the number, and a lady picked up at the other end and asked what my emergency was. I barely slurred the words, too much weed, back to her. She asked if I needed help, and I said yes. She went through the exercises of asking for my details, which I was somehow able to conjure up. I struggled to maintain consciousness, but was able to provide her with most of the answers till the point she mentioned that help was on the way. At this point, she started asking mostly typical questions to keep me on the line. However, I was rapidly losing consciousness, and I let her know that. I apologised in mid-speech for the fact that I was about to pass out while on the line with her. I stopped and looked at the phone in my hand, which had somewhat acquired a strong magnetic presence, and it was being repulsed from my face by the magnetic presence between it and my face. Then, I passed out. At this point, paranoia had turned into a bit of a sadness and amusement. I was sure that I was dying. My mother had recently visited, and she told me the story of one of her neighbours who recently died from a drug overdose. This is a rare occurrence in her locale. I was amused by the circumstances, because that is what seemed to be happening to me. I mentally apologised to her and other people I care for letting this happen to me. I was able to sit up again, and just in time to hear a radio outside my door. The door swung wide open with a "Hello, sir." A couple of folks from the fire department walked in. At this point, I'd regained consciousness. I was sitting on the couch with my head resting on my palm. The effect of the edibles seemed to be coming in waves, i.e. peaks and lows. In the peaks I was either passed out or in a state of paranoia. In the lows, I was aware of what was happening with some level of motor and mental control. The guys from the fire department asked me a bunch of questions in relation to what had happened, my previous experiences with the edibles, etc., in addition to checking my blood glucose levels as well. When they were through, they asked if I could walk outside, to which I replied yes. I already had my wallet in my pocket and simply picked up the phone which had dropped out of my hand when I passed out. Then I slipped on my Crocs. We went outside and I locked the door after me. I live on the 3rd floor in a building without elevators. The fire department folks had therefore lined up every couple of steps all the way down. I turned around and asked the guy behind me if we could use the alternate steps, but he insisted I go where they were taking me. Part of it was because it was a sort of walk of shame, which I was trying to avoid. Anyway, I obliged. This was the calm before the storm, and it seemed so poetic. At the time, it didn't occur to me, but afterwards it seemed like the firemen were lined up watching someone going to his funeral. They watched in solemn silence. As I walked towards my fate, there was some kind of dramatic music that started playing in my head. It was short, repetitive, and dramatic. I remember the tune, but the only lyrics I can remember out of it was, "This is how I shed my tears." I finally got to the bottom of the stairs and the paramedics were waiting. I was strapped onto a stretcher and rolled down the alley to the waiting ambulance. There were lots of firemen and police as I got put into the ambulance. The paramedic strapped me in and connected me to the machines to check my vitals. He then asked if I had a preference of where I wanted to be taken. I just mentioned my insurance plan and he suggested a place where they would take me. Off we were to the ER, which is pretty close to me. The inside of the ambulance was cool. The paramedic was on my left, engaged in reading my vitals. I was looking at the monitor in the ambulance and listening to the sound that was emanating from it. The dramatic music was still playing in my head, but mostly as a background sound. This was about 2.5 hours into the experience, which should have been somewhere around 10 PM. I had therefore consciously fought off the effect of the gummies as much as I could, on and off, for 2.5 hours. Even when I had passed out, I tried to regain control when I came back into consciousness. The tipping point of the gummies completely taking over never came in peace, as I had resorted to fight it off. I was hell-bent on maintaining consciousness, because passing out signified death to me, as per my earlier paranoia. Out of the blue, while I was still conscious and watching the monitor, I felt what seemed like my guts being ripped out of my body via the solar plexus area. "Ah!" I yelped in pain. This was somewhat of a cross between the sound of pain and an orgasmic release sounding thing. The next thing I realised, though, I was being pulled up by some kind of gravitational force through different kinds of layers, the last of which seemed like slime or oil, black in colour. This is similar to what you would see birds are so covered in, when there is an oil spill off a coast. The source of the gravitational pull started becoming visible as some kind of portal started opening where I was being pulled towards. The oil-like substance was all over me, and as I got pulled towards the portal, I was shedding more and more of it and turning into a light-like substance. The source of the gravitational pull, for lack of a better definition for it, was godlike, goldenish in colour. This was a gold-like pure energy entity that appeared like a bright light or sun. I only caught a glimpse of it and not the whole entity. I was finally through the portal and within the presence of this entity. The immediate reaction was that my jaw or so dropped in shock and awe. Next, there was this perception that it was overwhelming to be in the presence of this entity due to its pureness of being. It felt like burning when you get too close to a fire, unless you happen to be of the same quality as the fire. Almost immediately I started falling backwards away from the gold-like energetic entity and portal. I fell back into the slime or oil-like layer and got covered again by that substance. I kept falling all the way till I regained consciousness. The duration of this was maybe 1 or 2 seconds in normal time, but it felt slightly longer within the realm that I was sucked into. As soon as I regained consciousness, which was immediately, the first thing I heard the paramedic say is that I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I wanted to correct him and say, God, not ghost, but I couldn't speak. My head was still lifted off the stretcher, my jaws were stuck open from the shock and awe, and my hands were slightly lifted despite being strapped in. Essentially, my body was stuck in a posture reflecting what felt like my guts being ripped out of my body through the solar plexus area. It was painful, but yet, my face was stuck with this look of having seen a ghost, as per the paramedic's words. Almost instantaneously after regaining consciousness and hearing the paramedic's words, I lost it. Or rather, I died. But not a clinical death, mind you. I regained consciousness again, but in a different form. This was a form of consciousness that was outside my body, but within the ambulance. I could see the paramedic screaming my name and violently shaking my body, possibly to help it regain consciousness. However, I was watching him perform the actions from an out-of-body vantage point, on the right side of the ambulance. I could only look at the paramedic sadly from this out-of-body vantage point while he was screaming my name. I was trying to tell him that the name he was calling used to be me, but that I was no longer that. Obviously, he couldn't hear me because at this point I was not speaking from the physical body. My spirit, or soul if you rather, was detached from the body, and it was simply observing the paramedic trying to revive what was previously my body. It no longer belonged to me, mind you, or anyone for that matter. I lost consciousness again, from the vantage of this detached being. This was more like a memory gap rather than losing consciousness though, in this new form. When I regained consciousness, I was in the hospital waiting room, with the paramedic standing next to me. My lips felt extremely dry. I tried to lick them, to moisten them, but my tongue felt as if it was a lizard or some kind of reptile's tongue. This feeling was terrifying. I was conflicted on trying to moisten my dry lips versus the feeling of experiencing a lizard's tongue in my mouth. Finally, I was able to mumble a request of water to the paramedic. Based on his response, I could tell that he wasn't willing to give me any. After that point, I kept slipping into and out of consciousness, with my hands shaking now and then. I heard the paramedic tell someone else that I was tripping, since they both seemed to be amused at how far I was gone. I passed out again and woke up right as I was being rolled into one of the emergency rooms. I slightly opened my eyes as I was being rolled in, and the first image that struck me was that of Jesus on a cross, right above the entrance of the ER room. My hands were still wildly shaking. The nurses tried to ask each other what I was doing, with some of them speculating that I was praying. I was not praying. If anything, I'd come to the conclusion that anything that I do as a human being is actually pointless, in trying to earn my place in the presence of the gold sun-like entity that I'd encountered. The best I can do is to just live my life. The rest has to be by grace, not by action. Purity of being from a life well lived. Part of this conclusion is from the after effects of integrating the experience and understanding that the moment when I was in mental despair, because it became apparent that everything I have done in life is pointless but yet meaningful. It is all pointless yet meaningful for me. Was this the drug speaking, or just my state of being at the time? I was still slipping into and out of consciousness, but no longer at the paranoia level, or levels I encountered in the ambulance. This was more like in my head level. A couple of scenarios played over and over in my head, showing how my life can or would spectacularly collapse from this incident. I live in California and have somewhat lost compassion for the homeless after living in San Francisco for 7 years. The scenarios that played in my head were of chips falling in place, and my life spectacularly collapsing, such that I would be in the shoes of the homeless that I'd lost compassion for. This was all a bit comical and humbling, but I accepted it, if that was my fate from the experience. When I completely regained consciousness, I buzzed the nurses at the ER. An attendant came over, asked the time, and he said it was 1:05 AM. This is about 6 hours into the experience. He asked me to relax and go to sleep. When I woke up again, it was 3:05 AM. A nurse kept coming by to check on me since my eyes were open, but every time I couldn't speak. I could only barely whisper a word or two. This continued on and off till I was able to slightly lift the palm of my hand and acknowledge her as she approached me. A doctor came, checked on me, but I still couldn't speak. He asked me to move my eyes and I barely moved them. He cracked a joke asking if I wanted more weed. I cracked a smile but couldn't speak. I was discharged at around 7:30 AM in the morning, but I could barely walk out of the ER. The rest of the day was spent sleeping. 5 days later, on a Wednesday, I woke up with a strong smell of the edibles still in my system. I was dizzy most of the day, but no related hallucinations or paranoia, thank God. I was completely in my head, but the biology needed to catch up. A week after the experience at the time of this writing, I am still experiencing soreness or discomfort around my solar plexus area, where my soul, spirit, seemed to have been ripped out of me. There is some overall body fatigue, and it seems to have re-triggered some long COVID issues that I have previously addressed. The day after the experience, I was almost at the point of losing my mind because of that single moment of rapture in the ambulance, and resulting spiritual conclusions I took away from it. Luckily, all the right information seemed to have been waiting for me, almost by coincidence. But as I already know from practicing the art of flying with my feet firmly planted on the ground, nothing in my life is by coincidence at all. It happens when it's scheduled, even if it is an accidental overdose. I came upon a page in Ram Dass's book which points to more or less the same experience I had but via LSD, i.e., somewhat making it to a heaven-like realm, for lack of a better definition, via the psychoactive substance, being found out to be a fraud, and almost immediately being thrown out. Additionally, a different book that I came across immediately after pointed out that the oil-like substance I was dragged through is likely a lower-level astral plane. The effect of the edibles, therefore, at the highest point, was to rocket propel me through multiple astral planes to what may be considered as a heavenly layer of an astral plane. It should be noted though that it felt more like the gold sun-like pure energy entity was pulling me gravitationally towards it rather than something propelling me from behind. I was merely a passenger on this unexpected ride. As of now, I am back to my normal life. For starters, I still don't subscribe to any religion, but my outlook on life has significantly changed after this experience. Aside from the regression into long COVID issues health-wise, my mindset seems to have taken a leap forward in terms of being less judgmental and having more compassion. Everything that I have been doing in my life seemed pointless after experiencing the pure energy entity. However, after coming across other data points and integrating the experience, I've come to the understanding that I just need to sit back and watch life unfold, despite myself.
An insane psychedelic experience, published to the Actualized.org forums by Billy Simon. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I read Leo Gura's short replies about cannabis weeks ago, recounting they had a massive awakening with it, and I also did a lot of research on YouTube. Non-Dual Therapy channel has nice videos on it, and it seems like several spiritual people have had intense psychedelic trips with THC. So I was really curious, since I've already had several psychedelic experiences and some higher states of consciousness from sober techniques. The dosage and strain. I received this powerful Italian strain, I am Italian, of 20% THC and sativa dominant. After several days of anxiety and fear about it, I decided to try it out. I weighed 25mg of raw bud, which is very low, and put it in my small bong. Just 2 hits and nothing more. The trip. After the first hit, I feel a lot more present, silent, and my desires and wants seem to fade away. There's also a pleasant orange taste. Second hit, finishing up a tiny fragment of bud. Well, there's nothing happening. I guess it's okay, I'll do something else. Boom. And it hits me. Massive waves of anxiety and fear start to torture me. This has never happened so hard on psychedelics for me. It's the first time that it's so aggressive. Fear, anxiety, terror. I'm gonna die. I feel like I'm mentally dying, and my body is almost completely relaxed and still. I recognise the ego death, so I decide to let go in order to avoid a bad trip. I surrender over the course of 3 minutes, and my fast heartbeat calms down. Silence. I am nowhere. I am nowhere to be found. Where am I? I'm nowhere. This body is just a body. This voice is just a voice. I truly am nowhere. I start to feel that I am both nowhere and everywhere at the same time. I have small moments of deep samadhi with objects, but as soon as I start listening to my human voice, I get back into my ego and lose the samadhi, I notice I feel safer in my ego. It feels safe. I am this person feels safe. It's the fear of death, the fear of losing free will, and the fear of oneness. Massive energy waves. Huge energy and frequency waves hit me from everywhere. They are almost colourful, but they are mostly felt with the touch sense. It's infinite energy. I feel infinite energy hitting me everywhere. There's infinite energy forever and ever and ever in existence. It never stops and it's limitless. For several minutes, I felt drowning myself in this infinite energy. Felt like an infinite quicksand, an infinite rabbit hole made of waves. I feel a massive fear of losing completely myself in this infinite limitless texture of energy. What it means to be pure. Pure means that you surrender to existence, to the universe, to the whole. The pure one is surrendered and humble. Not morally humble, it is existentially humble. Surrendering to the universe, which I decided to do, made me feel like I was gaining so much power, but I recognised that this power was not mine. It was not mine. It was of the whole, of the singularity. Surrendering your uniqueness gives you the power of this whole, and that's purity. Fear of losing time and come down. Towards the end, I started to feel so out of place, literally, that I was too afraid of going deeper. I could totally feel that I could have gone deeper, but I was afraid to. Deeper into infinity, deeper into oneness, deeper into purity. It's too much for me. So I start intentionally to practice monkey mind, listening to music and reflecting on my life. Sometimes I gain more humanness, but sometimes I become conscious of how I'm creating time and how I'm creating my life story, which is a fiction inside my head. So I freak out and start to do something else to distract myself. I notice that I tend to do automatic self-inquiry in this trip, something I cannot stop because it seems part of the trip. I walk outside and total come down. At the end of the experience, I decide to walk outside and purposely think. The presence is strong, so sometimes my mind goes blank and I feel a strong connection to everything. After 40 minutes of walking, I'm somehow out of the trip. 2 hours of peak state, 1.5 hours of come down. What the fuck? It was an amazing experience, but also really aggressive, especially the infinite waves. I guess I cannot smoke weed for relaxation and fun at all.
Kundalini Awakening, a meditation and cannabis trip report by Daedalic, posted to earwid.org October 3rd, 2011. This all occurred about 9 months ago. I used some notes I had written immediately after this experience to aid in my recollection of it. In the month prior to the experience I'm about to describe, I ate psilocybin mushrooms for the first time, and then 3 times afterwards, with each dose spaced about 1 week apart. The first 3 trips left me with a new, more positive perspective on life, along with increased motivation. The last trip was very physically unpleasant, and left me in a state of ego loss, depersonalization, which lasted a week. Over the course of that week, despite feeling mentally lost, I continued on with my daily routines, which included eating a cannabis brownie every evening. I don't recall anything unusual about the highs the brownies gave me up to the point of my very odd experience, which I will describe here. Several hours after eating one of these brownies, I decided to do some meditation. I found a comfortable place to sit and began a mindfulness exercise. About 10 minutes into it, my attention drifted toward my own body and began to focus on my body high. Somehow, I managed to manipulate these sensations into an upward flow. Upon doing this, I noticed a warm vibration at the base of my spine. This sensation reminded me of an article I had read on Kundalini months ago, which I dismissed as BS at the time. So, out of curiosity, I decided to direct all of my attention to the strange sensation. As I focused, the vibration grew more intense and the heat grew hotter. The sensation began to rise and expand, moving slowly up my spinal column. The heat soon became excruciatingly intense. as though my internal organs had been set on fire. However, for some reason, this did not disturb me. I continued to focus on the sensation, feeling compelled to direct it upward. The sensation reached my solar plexus, where it filled my chest cavity, reaching the peak intensity of heat. Upon reaching my throat, the sensation cooled, the vibration increased, and the upward motion had ceased. With my throat vibrating, I took a brief respite, and then I directed the sensation upward again. The warm vibration spread upward over my face and forehead and began to gather at the top of my head. Then, I saw the image of a circle at the top of my head. Inside this circle there was darkness, and outside the circle were what appeared to be flames spiraling into the edge. Suddenly, the floor beneath me seemed to disappear, and I felt as though I was falling. This sensation of falling startled me, so I pushed the sensation downward from the top of my head for a moment, leaving me firmly sitting on the floor again. Relieved, I pushed the sensation back upward. Again, the floor disappeared from under me, and I was falling. The circle loomed above me larger than ever, and my frame of vision began to move into it. Upon entering the circle, my entire body became immersed in a blissful vibration. Around me there was a kaleidoscope of pink and purple light, arranged in a spiral ascending upward, full of indescribable patterns and intricacies. In the centre of this spiral, against the backdrop of a brilliant white light, loomed a silhouette of a thin, human-like figure with 6 arms and an oddly shaped head, sitting in a meditative pose. Upon seeing this figure, my blissful vibration was quickly replaced by the feeling of being electrocuted throughout my body. All the while, I continued to move upward, towards the strange figure. As I moved closer, a feeling of fear overtook me. Simultaneously, while having this out-of-body experience, my visual field expanded to include the inside of my own body as it filled with white light descending from the top of my head. My organs, blood vessels, tissues, and even cells all seemed to become visible to me as the white light moved downward, reaching the upper chest area. The feeling of fear intensified and quickly gave way to a feeling of impending doom. Fearing certain death, I panicked and decided to abort the experience. I performed several hand gestures unknown to me. I'm not sure whether these gestures had significance or were simply the result of desperation on my part. And with all my willpower, I forcibly retraced my steps back out of the circle. The inner white light lifted back upward, the ground appeared back underneath me, and with the aid of my hand movements, I quickly pushed the sensations down my spinal column, extinguishing them at the base of my spine. I was drenched in sweat, shaking and exhausted. The whole experience had lasted just a few minutes. In the days following the experience, I was in a state of mental turmoil. I was overwhelmed with empathy. Just watching the news would bring me to tears. My ego would become overly inflated at times and nearly non-existent at others. Fortunately, this soon stabilised and I felt relatively back to normal. However, there were some changes going on. My reaction to cannabis became greatly intensified, giving me intense feelings of pressure along my spine and in the centre of my forehead. This forehead pressure, which is intensified by cannabis, carries over to sobriety, even for weeks off it, and to be honest is present even as I type this up. Within the first couple moments of this experience, I was also plagued by muscle spasms that occurred mainly in my legs while I was lying down. In addition, there were periods when the pressure in my forehead became so intense that I was completely unable to concentrate. There were also times when I experienced an intensification of this pressure that gave way to feelings of peace and euphoria, despite being completely sober. Following this experience, I did extensive research on Kundalini. I found that others' experiences of Kundalini paralleled mine rather closely, including the after effects. I also found out that my Kundalini awakening was a rather violent one, probably due to the fact I was under the effects of cannabis at the time. I have meditated while high since then, and felt that same warm vibration at the base of my spine, though I haven't tried to focus on it. Since my Kundalini awakening, I've become less self-centered and my mind has become clear of the random distracting thoughts that would normally be floating around, which I find to be quite peaceful. Whenever I read one of these substance-induced Kundalini experiences, it always makes me reflect on my very first breakthrough, which was on LSD. This was the video here, The Brink of Insanity. It was the second trip report I ever wrote, and one of the first trip reports I shared on the channel many years ago. I imagine most of you have watched it who are big into the Vivec lore, but if you've never watched it, I'd highly recommend you do so, because it gives a big insight into where I'm coming from when I give these commentary sections and share my own insights and worldview regarding spirituality, consciousness, God, mysticism, the whole shebang. And whilst I didn't have a parallel experience to this person's, what I can relate to, I don't know whether I had a Kundalini awakening or whatever it was, but what I did feel 100% within my own body was this energy shooting from the base of my spine, my root chakra, if you will. I had no idea about any of this Kundalini chakras. I was a complete atheist a minute before this experience happened to me on LSD. Wasn't into meditation or anything. But 100% I directly felt within my own body energy shooting from the base of my spine up to the top of my head, almost exploding out of my head, and experiencing a sense of oneness and reunification with the universe and a cosmic orgasm, which just, it felt exactly like an orgasm, 100%, but universal in its magnitude. It was a deeply emotional and also troubling experience. I was crying my eyes out, and it was so weird because it felt like a release of all the egoic BS that I'd held onto and all the tension and all of the fear that I'd had up until that moment in life, and it all released. It really was a cathartic experience, but it was also quite disturbing because, I literally sort of felt like I'd broken out the Matrix and was never going to reform my own mind. I thought I'd gone literally insane, but it was weird because I'd gone insane, but I was also experiencing this deeply intense euphoria and literal ecstasy, the epitome of ecstasy. If you'd like to hear more about that experience, please check out the video in the description. But for those who don't know what Kundalini Awakening is, and I'm not saying here that I fully think this is legit, I definitely think there's credence to it, but I don't know enough about it for me to be like, yes, I'm very aware that chakras are fully real and that this is a part of reality. It's definitely a part of reality, but I don't know the truth of it. I don't know what the truth of Kundalini and chakras are. All I can say is that I can definitely open my mind to it because I had a very similar experience to what people describe as a Kundalini awakening on LSD. But they can happen just randomly to people and through meditation and all sorts of other spiritual pursuits. Mine just happened randomly and quite violently, a bit like this Daedalic person. So a Kundalini awakening, in the context of Eastern spiritual traditions, refers to the awakening of dormant spiritual energy at the base of the spine. This energy, often described as a coiled serpent, is believed to rise through the body's chakra system, potentially leading to a transformative spiritual experience and enlightenment. While the concept is deeply rooted in yoga and other spiritual practices, it's also gaining attention for its potential to enhance well-being and personal growth. Key aspects of the Kundalini awakening include the energy. Kundalini is considered a powerful life force energy residing at the base of the spine, often referred to as the Muladhara chakra. The awakening. This awakening is a gradual process that can involve various physical and mental symptoms as the energy rises through the chakras. The chakra system. The awakening is believed to be linked to the 7 chakras, energy centers that are associated with different aspects of physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Potential benefits. A Kundalini awakening is thought to unlock deep reservoirs of wisdom, enhance consciousness, and potentially lead to a profound transformation of one's being. Spiritual practices. Practices like yoga, meditation, and specific breathing techniques are often used to facilitate and support the awakening process. Important considerations. It is not a one-size-fits-all experience. The Kundalini awakening can vary significantly from person to person. Potential challenges. The process may involve challenges and discomforts, especially as the dormant energy begins to move and clear blockages within the body. Guidance is important. it's recommended to seek guidance from experienced practitioners or teachers to navigate the journey safely and effectively. In essence, Kundalini awakening is a spiritual concept that, when understood and approached with care, can offer the potential for profound personal transformation and growth. So, Kundalini awakening, is it legit? Is it New Ager spiritual BS? Don't think that's the truth, to be fair. I mean, Kundalini isn't a New Age phenomenon. It's been going about for a very, very, very long time. I believe it has its origins in sort of the yogic traditions in India. I don't really know much about this, to be honest. All I know is that I can relate to the actual experience of energy shooting from the bottom of my spine up to the top, almost like opening my third eye in a sense. I don't actually know literally what happened to me. All I know is that throughout so many of the years since that experience, I've read countless reports, watched videos. In fact, there was a video by Jared Wright with your mate Tom, and he described a Kundalini awakening, and it was the first time I made the parallel between a Kundalini awakening and my own breakthrough / ego death experience on LSD, because it wasn't in direct parallel to the other ego deaths I'd read about online. It felt way more cosmically aligned in terms of like having sex with the universe itself, which is a lot of what some Kundalini awakenings seem to be described as. So yeah, what is it? Is it real? Is it not? What are your thoughts on it? I definitely am open-minded to it, to be honest, and the more I read about it, the more I seem to gravitate toward it being an actual aspect of the human experience. And it's definitely changed my life ever since I had my own little awakening, and 100% in relation to cannabis, which I just cannot experience like how I used to before. And I get the exact same sort of pressure on my forehead and weird sort of this maelstrom of euphoria and dysphoria all moulded into one. It's really not nice. I just avoid cannabis altogether. Although I will say happy 420 to any of my stoners in the audience. I imagine quite a lot of you. Hope you've had a good day, celebrated with safety and style, and hope you enjoyed this little insight into cannabis and the spiritual properties that it can induce. Just remember to be careful with it, like anything, and take it easy. I shall see you on the other side.
The following cannabis trip report was sent in by Ryan. This is a great little report because it hammers home a point that I think a lot of people take for granted, and that's the fact that any psychoactive chemical can affect people extremely differently. Oftentimes I find that psychonauts have a habit of dismissing people's trip reports on cannabis because personally for them it affects them in a very subtle, sort of passive way. But for people like, say, Ryan in this report and me, when we smoke cannabis, it can be a full-on psychedelic trip with God realization experiences, ego dissolution, visuals, hallucinations of entities, etc. And people just like to reduce this down to, oh, well, your weed was tampered with clearly, or it was actually a completely different substance to weed. But nah, honestly, if the other week, like, I smoked some weed and thought, oh, alright, I can smoke quite a bit and see what happens. And I was having some pretty dark, depressing, ego dissolution, solipsistic experiences. And it was not pleasant. And it just hammered home to me the point that, yeah, people need to be a bit more open when it comes to understanding that cannabis is a psychedelic and it does affect you extremely differently depending on your genes, your level of consciousness, your ego. So many little factors that can affect your reaction to something that a lot of people just consider to be a very light psychedelic like cannabis. But yeah, now that I've finished rambling, let's get stuck into the video. November 5th, 2016. A family camping trip report with a cannabis vape pen. During a family trip along a Florida river in November 2016, my family and I had planned on taking our usual tubing trip with the other hordes of people who frequent this location most of the year. In Florida, most of the year is comfortable for swimming, especially along spring runs, as the water temperature is 72 degrees year round, cool in summer and warm in winter. This particular campground has about 100 campsites along a river, and at times there's a very party-like atmosphere, with a mix of families and partying college kids. It was a beautiful, brisk and sunny November day. We all jumped on our floats and headed downstream for about an hour and a half float. A person in the group had a vape pen with near 100% THC. I'd been drinking a little earlier in the day, so when the vape pen made its way to me, I took a huge long rip. It took about 2 minutes for the effects to kick in. What followed next took me by surprise, because A, I was floating in the middle of a river and could have easily drowned, and B, the sudden onset of a psychedelic trip with what I thought was a non-psychedelic substance. I was immediately phased out of my body, and phased into what appeared to be outer space. Planets were visible, and I come to see myself laying in a small pod-like structure anchored in the vastness of this realm. A portion of my awareness was left floating on the river, since later on when I described what would become a short psychedelic trip, my father, who was floating next to me, stated that I was babbling on about planets and stars. As I gazed out towards this sci-fi screensaver view of planets before me, the planets themselves seemed to have a soul, a personality, an awareness of their own, and recognised me as one of their own as well. After sitting for what felt like a few moments, I had heard a voice that sounded similar to my own that said, "This is the origin of all thought." I sat in bewilderment for a few additional moments. Was this God? My higher self? As I continued to exist in space, I phased out of the pod I was laying in, and the sun became apparent and front and centre in my experience. I can only attribute this to the sun being in my face back in the normal waking world. Back in the trip, as I gazed into the sun, waves of an overwhelming euphoric feeling of unconditional love and warmth, like the love and light described during near-death experiences, poured from the sun towards and through me. As the love overwashed me, a Christ-like image within the sun became visible, with arms outstretched, surrounded by a golden orange glow. There's one painting by the psychedelic artist Alex Gray, which similarly depicts what is being experienced, entitled Christ with an Interfaith Heart. I was raised Catholic, but didn't take any of my forced church going during childhood with much reverence. I understood religion, but never took it on as my own. Further into college, I had an overtly atheistic and materialistic way of looking at the world, scornfully denouncing my somewhat religious upbringing. So the Christ-like imagery within the sun and all this love was a welcomed experience indeed. After a few moments with what appeared to be a living being that was the sun, my gaze continued from the celestial heights, back down to the river upon which I was floating. The trip now seemed to be superimposed on waking reality, as I could see the other people floating down the river. However, they seemed to also recognise the love and light flowing from the sun, basking in it and receiving it with joy. It was as if I had a glimpse of the higher selves within these individuals, from a different perspective. After coming back down, I re-entered my body and was able to get out of the water, albeit dazed and confused by the experience. It's taken years to understand what had happened. I'll never look at cannabis the same way. I still use it occasionally and treat it as a sacrament. I knew at high doses that this ancient medicine is psychedelic, but never did I imagine weed could catapult one into an expansive experience such as what happened to me that day on the river. I've had other experiences with low doses of psilocybin, but never to the extent and intensity of this one trip. I even had to ask the owner of the vape pen if there may have been any residue of other substances, such as DMT or the like, used with the pen. But nope, just plain THC triggered an accelerated awakening process in me, and has led to a dramatic change in lifestyle. I no longer consume alcohol, I eat only fruits and veggies, and no longer watch any TV or even read the news. I've always been attracted to the metaphysical, but this experience has cemented a lifelong change in me. I've come to find solace in knowing that which gurus, ancient sages and masters have been telling humanity for ages, that we are immensely powerful light beings having temporary human experiences. Enjoy the experience here. Positive or negative, There are lessons in divinity within every moment. Cheers. Jungleberry, a synthetic marijuana trip report from Shroomery. Shit fucked me up. I'm not quite sure where to begin with this. The weekend started off like any other. Call up some friends, ask if they want to smoke up, reach destination, proceed to get blitzed. So we're sitting outside of this cafe, quite a few of us, I'd say 8 or maybe 9. The plan was that we were going to have a couple bowls there and then, and go find somewhere to chill to just sit down and have a good time. My friends packed me a bowl of this stuff called Jungleberry, which I guess is sort of similar to the K2 Spice or whatever, and, as per usual, I cane that shit till my lungs are on the verge of combustion. It slowly starts to hit me, but I felt like being ballsy, so I asked for a second bowl not 10 seconds from the last. This is where shit starts to hit the fan. For the next 10 minutes I am ridiculously fucking high, and then reality starts to warp. Everything is completely black, but not in the way one would think. It wasn't like the colour black, nor the black where you close your eyes. It's the kind of black that exists before you were born, where there is just completely nothing there. Suddenly 2 specks of colour fade in, a red speck and a purple speck. At this point in time nothing was wrong, just 2 dots of colour in forever darkness. Now the colour starts to expand and contract, stretch and explode, blend with each other and revert back into dots, and then continue to just go completely insane. It doesn't sound bad, but it was painful. Extremely painful. Why was the rapid expansion and contraction of these 2 colours hurting me? Well, I have no idea. This felt like it was happening for an infinite amount of time. That I was trapped in this pre-life stage with red and purple colours fucking around forever. Then, instantly it all vanishes. Now this next part is extremely difficult to explain. My mind, like my consciousness, is trapped in an extremely narrow space. But as before, there was nothing there. Just this pre-life darkness. I had to keep my mind moving forward, for if I stopped or turned around, my mind would be consumed by something. I don't know what it was, but it was just something that would consume my mind. The issue was that as my mind was moving forward through this narrow space, terrifying things were spawning in front of my mind, although there was absolutely nothing there. My mind was extremely hesitant, and thus it would stop or turn around to try and flee, but end up being consumed by this void. Being consumed by this nothing again was indescribably painful, but as my mind was killed, it would be reborn in another narrow space of pre-life darkness. The amount of times my mind died and was reborn, I can't say. It felt like it was lasting forever and just continued to happen. Another transition occurred. With this repeating phenomena of pre-life darkness, except this time I was looking at myself from a top-down view. There I was, lying in this darkness, not on any surface, just lying there. Suddenly everything zoomed into the head of myself lying there in fetal position, and I saw myself sitting in an office chair, the types with rolly wheels and arms. I was tied to it with a thick rope, and I was also in a straitjacket. I began to imagine myself puking, constantly puking for who knows how long, and I could feel myself puking as well. I did indeed end up waking up covered in puke. Another transition this time. I was doing battle with everything in the universe, and luckily enough the surroundings weren't pre-life darkness, but I don't know what they were at all. When I say doing battle with everything in the universe, I don't mean swinging swords at puppies and planets. In fact, I don't know what I mean. It's indescribable. In order to win against this everything, I had to time something right in order to pass. Pass through what? I'm not really sure. Time what right? I don't know again. If I mistimed whatever I had to time correctly, I'd be transported to the pre-life darkness for eternity, and then transported back to try and time whatever it is that I had to time correctly. Eventually I ended up timing it right, after an infinite amount of time in this trip, upon which I woke up. But the bad shit doesn't end there. I woke up with absolutely no idea what the fuck had happened to me, where the fuck I was, what life was. I had no idea about anything. Call it 20 minutes of the worst case of amnesia around. It felt like I had been placed onto this earth by something. That at the very point I woke up from the trip was the very point where I had been brought into existence. All my friends were panicking and asking me if I was okay. I was busy asking them who the fuck they were, and where the fuck I was, and how the fuck I got here. This lasted for about 20 minutes, until I slowly started to piece reality back together again. Screw synthetic marijuana. First time, heavier hallucinations than any other substance I've ever encountered. It has been about 9 years since this trip, but I remember it as clearly as if it had happened last night. It was the first and only time I have ever experienced full open-eye visuals that had little to no relevance to the world around me. I believe it was a JWH derivative, but I can't be certain. It was a relaxed setting for the trip. 3 buddies and I were out in the woods at night behind a house one of them lived at, sitting on some of those reclining pool chairs. I was young and dumb, smoking out of a bent-in Monster Energy can. I didn't feel anything for the first 4 hits, so I stupidly kept taking bigger and bigger hits each time. It wasn't until my friend passed me the can to take a 5th hit that shit hit the fan for real. In a blink of an eye, everything in the world faded to black except for him. He stood up and slowly started to turn green and bulk up like the Hulk, but once he hit full size, blood started to flow from every part of his body. It was coming out as sweat, streaming out of his eyes, openly flowing from his nose, mouth and ears until he was nothing but blood. As fast as this hallucination started, it ended and he was back to sitting beside me trying to pass me the can. So I took the can and had another hit, probably because I have a big dick. I went to pass it to my friend on my left when the same fade to black thing started to happen. I watched him stand and proceed to laugh the most evil and cynical laugh I've ever heard. Slowly, I watched as his skin started to turn colours and break open, rotting on his bones till it started to fall to the earth. His flesh sunk into the soil, where a tree started to grow at an extremely fast rate. When it was done, it was a 25-foot tall weeping willow. It was about this time that the fog started to roll in behind him and the tree with gravestones appearing in the distance. He gave me one last laugh, then proceeded to rip off his appendages one by one, hanging them on nooses created by rope-like limbs of the tree beside him. Much like before, as fast as it started it had ended, and I was back to sitting with my friends, with my buddy on my left asking why I wouldn't let go of the can. Apparently he had been trying to take it while I was in this hellish trip. Around this time I told everyone that I felt the need to go back inside, mainly because fuck mosquitoes and uncomfortable chairs. I stood up to lead the pack back to the house, but all the blood rushed from my head and created another hallucination. I was in a trench surrounded by dead bodies. I looked up over the edge to see barbed wire and an open field beyond, with people shooting from an opposing trench. At that time, a man who appeared to be of Asian heritage came running across no man's land. He took a knee and promptly shot me in the head, which caused me to fall backwards. Back to reality, I'm lying in the pool chair again, with my friends asking if I'm alright, because I just stood up and collapsed back down. I told them I was fine, but still wanted to go inside. I blinked and they were all gone. They had left me deep within the forest by myself. I started to hear things all around me, see things ducking into the shadows every time I tried to get a good look at them. I pulled out my knife about the same time I saw what was making these noises. They were tribal pygmy people, about a foot tall, brandishing small knives and spears, obviously on the hunt. This is the only point I do not fully remember. I somehow made it out of the forest. The day after this we went and looked, and I had apparently hacked away at several small trees with a dull butterfly knife. But back to that night, I had made it through the forest, but there was still a pool in between me and the house. Don't ask me why, but my only idea as to how to pass it was to walk out onto the diving board and slowly try to walk across the water like Jesus. After about 5 minutes of doing this, I finally realised that I could just walk around the pool. So I entered the house to see my friends watching Rocky Horror Picture Show, which I had never seen before. I came to the conclusion that I was just hallucinating about transvestite vampires for some reason. I decided to lie down on the bottom bunk of my friend's bunk bed. I got really comfortable at first, but then decided that I wanted to talk to my friends, so I attempted to sit up. As much as I tried this, I couldn't seem to sit up whatsoever. In a split second, I found myself looking down at my body from the top corner of the room. I thought, well, at least I can see why I can't sit up. I tried with all my might to control my body, considering I wasn't currently in it at the moment. I saw my back lift off of the bed about an inch, but there seemed to be some sort of muscle connecting my back to the bed. I sat up with more and more force, stretching and eventually ripping the muscle. Blood started to flow onto the bed and shoot across the walls, making all my friends stand and start screaming. My friend's mum runs in hearing them and starts screaming herself. She pulls out her phone and starts to talk to a police dispatcher asking for an ambulance. At this time I popped back into my body, fully sitting up, but my friends were back to sitting down as calm as can be, watching the television. No blood, no screaming, no panicking mothers calling 911. I sat and looked at my friends for a few moments, taking in that everything I had witnessed was a hallucination. Then I saw that none of them had any joints in their bodies. There was literally a 3-inch gap where there should have been their necks, elbows, wrists, hips, etc., with 5 strings coming up from them as if they were puppets. I looked up to see that the ceiling was gone, and instead there was a giant white hand with a string connected to every finger for each person. Once the hands realised that I could see them, they released the strings and vanished. In doing so, my friends fell to heaps on the ground. Slowly, these strings started to move on their own accord, forming into a web on the opposing wall from me. The fallen bodies of my friends started to shake, then bolted up to their hands and feet, with their backs to the ground, but with their heads turned 180 degrees to where they could look at me correctly. They then started to crawl upon the web made by the strings like spiders, whilst all staring at me. And then, back to reality. They are all sitting exactly as they were, still steadily watching TV. At this time I feel that I've become extremely nauseous, so I run outside and puked. I walked back inside and get some water, and then went and laid back down and fell asleep. This concludes my first and only fully fledged trip. I hope you enjoyed reading. How can one live with such knowledge? Methoxetamine and Cannabis by The Explorer. Me, male in his early 20s, graduate student, stable personal life, introverted, philosophical, analytical. If it matters, I'm gay and non-religious. My prior drug history. Smoked a bowl of weed for the first time in December 2011. Since then, I've tried in order DMT, Salvia, MDMA, LSD, DXM, DOC, LSA, DPH, only once, nitrous, ketamine, mushrooms, crystal meth, methylphenidate, and 5-MeO-MIPT. Also the usual litany of alcohol, tobacco, nicotine, and spice. And finally, methoxetamine. I fell in love with dissociatives after the first time I tried DXM, in February 2012. I spent 2 months moving from a high first plateau dose, 195mg for me, all the way up to a mid-third plateau dose, 850mg. I had many wonderful nights with DXM, exploring its inner realm potential, listening to music as I never had before, and allowing the drug to take me to new regions of the mind. Around that same time, late March, I obtained a line of ketamine, the drug I'd been longing for weeks to try, at a rave. I got home that night, tried it out, 125mg insufflated, and decided that, given its relative rarity and exorbitant prices, I ought to give MXE, a fairly inexpensive, legally available analogue, a try. So I ordered a gram from a reliable vendor, waited a couple of weeks for it to arrive from overseas, and gave it a spin. Took me about a month to finish off that first gram, including about 250mg that I gave away or sold to friends. I'd take oral or sublingual doses of 20 to 30mg, dipping my finger into the bag and licking up little bits of the powder until I got to where I wanted to go. I was impressed with the gentle nature of the experience, the way the drug allowed me to glide in and out of space effortlessly. The dissociation felt almost voluntary. If I closed my eyes, I could feel a bit removed from the world, but if I wanted to remain fully functional, I could do that too. DXM has a way of shooting you out of a cannon into the dissociative realm. MXE, much like ketamine, is clean, soft, and friendly. I took doses like this many times before going to work, or with a bowl of weed at night to relax and enjoy music. I'd also attempt medium doses, 30 to 50mg, often mixed in with something else such as weed, shrooms, or even DMT. These experiences were quite nice, although as a lover of visual immersive experiences, I was extremely disappointed by the fact MXE's closed-eye visuals were so dull and dark. DXM and ketamine gave me lucid dreamlike visuals. For a couple of weeks, I thought that I must have burned myself out or something, that it was my fault, not the drugs, that I was seeing so little when I closed my eyes. This isn't the case. MXE is simply not a very visual drug until you take a significantly higher dose. Realising that I enjoyed MXE, I ordered another 2 grams. At first I kept experimenting with low range doses, up to about 30mg, although every couple of weeks throughout April, May and June I'd go on slightly higher dose trips, up to about 60mg. I considered these to be fairly strong experiences. They thrust me into a dreamlike state, in which I could interact with people in a detached, light, airy way, think about life from a logical, detached perspective, and enjoy music, especially ambient or atmospheric music, in new ways. The euphoria was incredibly pleasant, and was one of the highlights of the experience. In May, I spent the night with one of my druggy friends and we decided to give the M-hole a go. We turned off all of the lights except for our laptops, measured out 80mg doses, the suggested amount for an M-hole experience according to several online sources, and closed our eyes. We were both very impressed by the experience. Music was ethereal, the space and size distortions were unbelievable, and the euphoria was breathtaking. This was a one-off thing though, and having a friend around significantly altered the experience. This was my first truly high dose MXE experience. Anyway, later in June, a few weeks ago as I'm writing this, I started using the drug more frequently, in an attempt to unlock its spiritual, rather than recreational, potential. I'd make more of a conscious effort to turn the lights off, immerse myself in atmospheric music, and smoke a lot of weed to thrust me into space. Just as a side note here from personal experience, combining cannabis with a dissociative like ketamine or MXE can seriously potentiate the experience into psychedelic levels in some way. Cannabis is an amazing potentiator of chemicals. It can also be a bit of a game of Russian roulette because you really don't know which way it's going to go. I'd take doses in the 50 to 70 milligram range regularly for a couple of weeks. These experiences felt otherworldly, similar in intensity to my third plateau DXM experiences, except with less of a body load. Visuals became slightly more apparent, the euphoria ramped up, the headspace felt more immersive. I also felt like I was forgetting more of the experience upon waking up the next morning, but that wasn't too big of a deal. I was used to that from a DXM. As June turned into July, I thought that I'd once again go for the M-hole. I took an 80mg dose with some weed over the course of a couple of hours, and had an experience similar to the one that I'd had before with my friend, except, of course, I was alone and more able to immerse myself in the headspace. I told one of my friends that I'd gone deeper into the hole than before, and that I felt like I was truly unlocking the drug's spiritual potential. The problem was that there was this nagging doubt. I kept reading online that if you'd truly been in the hole, you'd know it, that it was like falling off a cliff. I thought that I'd been in the hole, simply because the experience had become qualitatively different than what my medium-high doses have offered, but wasn't quite sure if I was right. I was wrong. It wasn't until later that I realised that my entire conception of dissociative drugs had been skewed. Given the dosage information online, I figured that the drug kind of maxed out after 80mg or so, that beyond that was likely blackout or overdose. Taking 100mg for instance, always struck me as foolish. But that's not true. A person can take 80, 100, 120, 150mg of MXE. 80mg is only the entrance point to the M-hole, not the peak experience that the drug offers. So I decided to go for it. I decided to really try to enter the M-hole for real. A few days ago I weighed out 30mg, a nice way to begin the experience. An hour went by and I snorted 30mg more, bringing me to my typical medium-high level headspace. Another 30 minutes went by and I snorted another 20mg. Another 30 minutes, another 20mg plus a bowl of weed. Then I turned the lights off and entered the hole. At first, I was overcome by stereotypical feelings associated with first-time entrance to the dissociative hole. Did I take too much? Am I going to be okay? Am I dying? If I stop fighting this experience, am I going to black out? But I reminded myself that the drug is already in my system, that I didn't take anything unsafe, and that this was simply an incredibly intense altered state of consciousness that if I'm going to enjoy, I'm going to need to surrender to the experience. Calming myself down only took about 2 minutes, and then I let go. Then, my head was filled with a new thought. Holy shit, this is it. This is the fucking hole. I'm in. I rested my head against my pillow, and my mind took over. I was then given a bizarre cosmic tour through the nether regions of my mind. Mystical architecture floating on clouds, strange rooms that I'd never seen before, unfamiliar people who somehow seemed so comforting, intense size and space distortions like nothing I'd ever felt before. One minute the entire universe felt like it had been stuffed into a small corner. The next, I was suspended above an infinite void. Manic euphoria, total detachment from any worldly concern.
atmospheric music gave a mystical, transcendental feel to the experience. Oh yeah, and it makes you piss like a gallon of water. Stay hydrated, kids. Anyway, that was obviously a pretty goddamn wonderful experience, so I decided to venture back into the hole the following 2 nights, last night and the night before. Both times, I took 120 milligrams and smoked a bit of weed throughout. The 2 experiences I just had with this dose were very similar, so I'll simply recount the basic nature of it all. Keep in mind that if you seek an experience like this, you need to be alone in your room, at night, in the pitch black darkness, with your eyes closed. All of the immersion was still prominent. You're fully sucked into the wormhole. But the key feature of the hole at this level is the godlike euphoria. It feels as though you've literally entered the gates of heaven, and that God and his angels are trumpeting your arrival as the chosen one. It's as if your entire body has erupted into the best orgasm of your life, times 5, while you're winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Basically, it's just perfect. It's like you're bathing in a warm, radiant, existential glow. Your entire consciousness is just absolutely immersed in a divine, godlike, ecstatic bliss. All is right with the universe, and I mean the entire universe. Everything can be placed into perspective, and anything, I mean anything at all that might be worrying you, seems irrelevant in the grand scheme of the cosmic patchwork. You get it when you're in the hole, and the very fact that you exist is reason for a jubilant, joyous celebration of the soul. You are in love with yourself and your existence, and it's an unparalleled state of transcendental contentness. You feel, in a word, like God. I successfully replicated this experience. This happened 2 nights in a row, so I know it's not a fluke. So what do I do, now that I know that I can go to heaven whenever I want, if only I pay about $2 for a line of white powder? How does a person live with the knowledge that all of the kings that have ever existed, all of the most richest, powerful, successful people in the world, all of the spiritualists and religious leaders and monks of the world, have never felt such bliss as I have, with this little white powder, synthesized for the first time just a couple of years back? It's better than any sex I've ever had, any accomplishment I've ever achieved, any friendship or love I've ever known. How am I to process this? My life is great. The whole helps me see how wonderful my sober life is. My sober life is fantastic. I'm a very blessed person. My friends, and my best friend in particular, are amazing. I have a boyfriend with whom I'm completely sexually and emotionally compatible. I've accomplished many interesting and unusual things. I'm on track to earn a doctorate one day. I've met my idols and role models. I've been to many concerts and raves. I have a good home life, and unlimited opportunities await me. My life is great, but the hole is better. Nothing compares to what I felt in the hole. So what do I do now? Is it okay to go into the hole a lot? What are the dangers, emotionally and intellectually and physically? Should I go back yet again tonight? Why wouldn't a person want to? Why would anyone deny the opportunity to do this again, over and over? I'm not sure how I need to move forward. This isn't really how I'd have expected myself to respond to this situation, if someone had told me I'd be in it. But why would I have ever expected myself to be in this situation? It's totally absurd, and nobody would believe me if I told them anyway, so why bother? I now know how to enter a state of godlike, ecstatic, euphoric bliss any time I want. I mean, isn't this completely absurd? What does a human being do when he's given this ability? What is one to do with knowledge like this? Does he tell others about it? Does he devote much of his life to studying and exploring it? Does he arrange a routine around it? Oh yeah, I'd much rather spend my nights refreshing internet sites and fapping rather than going to heaven and experiencing divine cosmic bliss. I mean, what is this? It's a farce. This is an absurd scenario on an almost literary scale. How can a person live with this knowledge? How can I look at life in the same way after experiencing this? Someone once told me that Anne Shulgin hated ketamine because she never knew of anyone who could handle it. I now see exactly what she meant. I've experienced heaven, and I know that I can experience it over and over again whenever I want, and I don't know how to proceed. One would think that it would excite me and make me want to tell everyone all about it, right? But I feel like trying to explain it to anyone would be ridiculous and impossible. Instead, it's just left me strangely content and kind of objective and detached. The whole is a secret inner realm where everything is perfect. I can go to it whenever I want. Again, I ask, how does a human being confront this knowledge? The drug is not physically addictive. It will not destroy my body, unless I use it idiotically, which ain't gonna happen. There's no hangover. It's a wonder drug. What's the catch? What's the catch to having instant nirvana in a little white powder? I know, it sounds like a tragedy in the making, disaster over the long term waiting to happen, but it looks so perfect from here. I'm going to hand my MXE to my best friend tonight, so it's at his house rather than mine. I don't want it to tempt me. I want to go back tonight, I really do, and I'm afraid that I might do it if I have it with me. I don't want to build a massive tolerance, and I don't want to abandon life and become obsessed with the whole. So right now I'm sitting here, fixated on the whole, trying to figure out right now what role it will play in my life. I'm absolutely perplexed. I'm not sure what to do. I just feel like something is different now. I'm alternately nervous, excited, content, confused, amazed, enlightened, perplexed, scared, hopeful. Enter the dissociative hole at your own risk. If you want to go to heaven, experience nirvana, feel ultimate cosmic bliss, and achieve a rapturous state of being, you can do it for the price of a Big Mac. You can know what it's like to be God, but how will you live with that knowledge?
Peeking into Insanity and Infinity, an LSD and cannabis trip report by Goddess Mode, posted to earwid.org May 19th, 2014. This experience happened 5 days ago as of this writing. I was enjoying tripping pretty much once a week, and decided to keep up the spirit here. I was also so pumped because of how my bicycle day trip had gone, that I really wanted to take another large dose of LSD. A friend had recently dropped off some more strips with me, 3 of which I had been told beforehand were weirdly cut. Generally, they're just a bit thinner than regular 10 strips, but one of them was actually a bit longer, maybe around 11 hits or a little more, though it got quite thin at that point. That's why I've decided to list this as about 7 to 9 hits, because I would feel confident in saying that it was at least 7 or 8, but not necessarily more. 9 would be a generous estimate. The first thing I decided to do was just take this strip at T+0 hours, and see how it hit me. I'd also been smoking weed all day, and continued to while waiting for this dose to kick in. I'd actually felt just a little bit sick before dosing, so I wasn't sure if I wanted to dose any higher than this just yet. I could already feel before too long that my stomach was not happy with what I had done. This turned out to only be a phase during the come-up though, and once the LSD was starting to run in full force, I actually started feeling a lot better. I was texting my friend about how this thin strip was actually still pretty strong despite its size, and I was happy with it. My mind was racing out of control like it usually does with high LSD doses, and at T+1 hour and 45 minutes, I decided that I was feeling good enough that I wanted to take more. So, I took some more of my regularly cut hits, though I actually cut them out wrong, and so I took a little bit higher of a dose that I intended to. In my phone notes, I wrote 5.2 hits. So, all in all, I probably took somewhere around 13 hits or so. I continued smoking weed, and I felt this second dose kicking up pretty quickly. And then, things started to get really, really trippy. There was a pattern I was getting that was covering all of my vision, which was a big spiral whirlwind that had several ghostly blue arms reaching out of it at several points. This type of hallucination is actually something I've in the past only gotten by combining LSD and salvia. I guess I no longer need the latter to reach this place on the former, to a degree anyway. This, though, hit me very hard, because these hallucinations were much more three-dimensional than the ones I normally get on LSD, even if not as intense visually as some have been for me in the past. I got up and went to the bathroom, and when I was in there, suddenly things became very much like Alice in Wonderland for a moment. On LSD, whenever I hallucinate anything, it's only ever been a reflection of some personality trait recognizable inside of me, on a superficial level, like the representations of my sexuality just personified through projected images of myself in different psychedelic clothing styles. This time, however, that reflection was still there on a symbolic level, and my hallucinations were starting to take on some level of independent form. As I saw myself in the mirror, I felt like I was being followed by some kind of ghosts or demons, and for a second, I felt my perception beginning to turn, as if I was about to start slipping into a delirium. But then, it suddenly let up. I have experienced this delirium before when I took 20 hits of LSD years ago, which is generally characterized for me by watching my body act out various ritualistic movements from a third-person perspective, though feeling it like it's happening in first person. But that time, it wasn't accompanied by this same level of vivid hallucination. Even back then, I knew that everything I saw on my trips was just a visual and a reflection of something within me. But this trip had finally started to push that. I started to wonder what it would be like to go back to that level of delirium I had before with this new level of hallucination. I returned to bed and tried to get music playing on my laptop, but it wouldn't work, so I had to struggle with it for a few minutes. Eventually, I gave up because I couldn't figure it out, and I went to grab a different one instead. There are multiple here. Honestly, I can't even remember much of the music I listened to, or much about the first phase of the trip that can actually be conveyed through the words. My thoughts were reeling as they drifted further and further into nonsense. A constant stream of beautiful visions, consisting of colours from the entire rainbow spectrum, was exploding out of the centre of my vision and into my surroundings. And these visions were representative of the many different concepts that my mind was searching through all at once with its word salad database dump that was my very train of thought. The amount of different emotions and feelings and perceptions I was taking in at once was overwhelming, and made me feel as though LSD is one of the psychedelics that can truly take you to infinity. Several times I thought to myself, in some instinctive way or another, that so much of this truly could not be explained no matter how hard I tried. There comes a point when most or all of the experience is perceptual in a way that you just never come across in ordinary consciousness. But again though, even for most of this trip I was still lucid enough to handle reality perfectly well whenever I needed to, with the only exception being those brief moments of delirium, which I've never really experienced on this level before from any psychedelic, including DMT, which I have yet to have a full breakthrough on. I was, though, thinking that I might be ready for those kinds of trips after this one. At one point I got up to walk around the house just because I had so much energy in me. In the dark living room, the furniture was doing my usual LSD thing of transforming into people lying around the room, and some of the furniture was just changing to have people lying or sitting on them. These perceptions seemed a little more random than they normally do. I think again reflecting the fact that I was at the point where they were going from just being reflections to being more like actual entities. There was a point when I went back into my room for just a brief moment, and I was completely fooled by a hallucination. I got up off my bed, and suddenly, a very close friend of mine was in the room with me. The first person who I ever came out to about being transgender. She simply smiled at me, and suddenly, the craziness of thoughts whirling out of control I had been experiencing up until that moment calmed, like just taking a quick breath of fresh air before diving back in. This hallucination passed almost as quickly as it appeared, but that one moment was all it took to have a profound impact on me. Never before have I had an entity hallucination that I had no doubts about whatsoever and just fully believed. Not on a psychedelic, a dissociative, a deliriant, or salvia, even on diphenhydramine, which I used stupid amounts of years ago. I'd gotten to the point where hallucinations were that dreamlike in design, but I always remembered at least on some level that they actually weren't real. This time though, I actually felt the full emotion of having my friend there with me. Immediately after I came out of it, I had the impression left with me that the reason I had seen her specifically was because back when I still had a lot of psychological issues I was working on, I was talking to her and it always helped me sort of calm the craziness in my mind. I was filled with a love and appreciation for her as a friend, and sent her a message about how thankful I am to know her. This experience really made me want to explore full breakthrough psychedelic doses even more than I already did, and it gave me even more respect for the way that LSD allows me to go deeper and deeper with each experience. I'm betting that these experiences will come to me even more easily in the future. Another thing this trip really made me realise is just how much other hallucinogens can open up entirely new doors on psychedelics that you might otherwise not have seen without them. Like the way that I now seem to be able to get effects from LSD alone that I formerly got from combining LSD with salvia. I'd been planning to go a little crazy with the LSD I still have left, just since right now I know it's actually legit and potent, and just keep taking large doses until I run out to sort of celebrate my return to tripping this much. But now I'm left more with a desire to try to use LSD combined with as many other things as possible, both to bring out their effects more, and to further my relationship with LSD itself. I'm honestly getting tired of focusing on the large doses as well. Not that they aren't fantastic, but I just need a little variety in my life too. The time I got to mix LSD with 4-HO-DIPT recently, however, was pretty awesome. I would like to explore that chemical by itself more too, and then take a higher, more visionary dose of both the LSD and the 4-HO-DIPT to see how they really play together. I thought that the kind of visuals they produced together and with nitrous oxide were already apparent in my next LSD trip that included neither, and this reminded me very much of the way that there's a visual effect I never once got on LSD until I combined it with a high dose of mushrooms, and now I've gotten it every time since. I feel like after this trip, these combinations are probably how I'll use the rest of my supply instead, getting to enjoy other psychedelics alone, and then together with LSD. After a while, the craziness started to calm down a bit, and I stopped thinking so much about breakthroughs and combinations. The LSD was shifting into its more stimulating and nootropic phase for me, and my mind was becoming filled with various ideas. I started to theorize about just what psychedelics actually are, in relation to different states of consciousness, and fit it into why I tend to get certain effects from various substances of why I'm able to go deeper into some than others. I had started to think that for a long time, the reason that LSD was always able to take me so much further out than other psychedelics is because the psychedelic state is so sexual for me, and I've been repressed in this way for a long time. But the directly sexual effects of LSD, such as through dopamine receptors, help me to open up more easily than I might with other psychedelics. But now that I'm actually starting to overcome these issues, I'm starting to think that I may be able to get more out of different drugs as well. I thought a lot about infinity some more too, and my mind drifted to 5-MeO-DMT. I've never tried it, but suddenly, the idea of an infinite white light just made sense, because I understood that it's not just white, it's just that white is the result of taking everything and projecting it all at once. I tried to fit this too into my psychedelic framework, as I thought about how psychedelic states of consciousness may have played a role in religious experiences throughout history. I came out of this phase feeling as though psychedelics are certainly something very divine, whatever your beliefs may be, in a human context or otherwise. The hallucinations began to die down, I believe, sometime around 8 to 10 hours in, but the stimulation lasted for a very long time afterward, as did residual visuals. I feel like this trip lasted a little longer as a reflection of it being a deeper trip than I'm used to, as I was still feeling something more than just an afterglow up to some 14 hours after dosing, which is more than normal for me. The mood that this trip has left me in is basically that before I really wanted to go all out with LSD more, but now I actually really want to explore what other psychedelics can give me more as well. I'm also much more interested in combinations because different psychedelics really do bring amazing things out of each other which don't seem to go away afterward. And I'd like to start building up a strong relationship with all of them, the good ones anyway. I think this is probably the pattern of use I'll stick to for a while, and not living out the nitrous anymore. And then I'll start using DMT again to try to go for a breakthrough. This experience feels like it just gave me a taste of what's to come in that sense. So, this is probably my last really high dose LSD experience for now. I cannot say that I won't miss them.
Eternal Dance of Beautiful Nothingness. A DMT and Cannabis trip report, posted by Quantigy to Irwin.org on September 14th, 2010. Let me preface this account by saying that I've had many previous experiences with psychedelics, which I believe properly prepared me for my very first DMT trip. This experience occurred this past weekend at the gathering of the Vibes Music Festival in Bridgeport, Connecticut. My friend and I were fortunate enough to find a dealer in the campsite who not only had some very kind dope, but also DMT, of which we purchased a half gram. Over the course of the last few months, I'd been avidly reading about DMT experiences and was very curious and excited to try it for myself. My plan was to trip on mushrooms that evening and try the DMT earlier the following day. That night, while shrooming, I made a conscious effort to continuously direct strong, positive thoughts towards myself and my place in the universe. I was hoping to cultivate a strong, positive experience with the DMT the next day, as I had read of people having very difficult experiences with the drug at times. The next day rolls around, and my friend and I find a spot on the beach, directly across from the Green Vibe stage, where one musical act was ending and other beginning to tune up. I sat back in a lawn chair, facing Long Island Sound, and proceeded to prepare my pipe. I was somewhat concerned, because I'd read many people's accounts of the proper way to smoke DMT, water pipes, vaporizers, butane lighters, etc., and I had none of those things, only a very small glass piece and a run-of-the-mill lighter. Still, I could not help but be aware at this point of a strong sense of purpose around what I was about to attempt. It was palpable. This feeling that I was supposed to be right here, right now. Using the tip of a pen cap, I measured very approximately around 10 to 15 milligrams of the brownish yellow powder onto the weed in my piece. And then, I covered it with another small bud. Since I had no idea what to expect, I gave my friend very simple instructions. Number 1, take the piece from me when I finish. And 2, if I appear to be in any kind of distress, say nothing, just hold my hand. The wind coming off the water was strong, and so I pulled the towel over my head and lit up. I lit the bowl slowly, drawing a deep breath and holding the smoke in my lungs for about 20 to 30 seconds. Upon exhalation, I tasted pot and nothing else. I waited about 2 minutes, and while I was definitely stoned, I knew I hadn't gotten a good enough hit of the DMT. I asked my friend to sprinkle in some more, and thankfully, he instead suggested I try one more hit first. So I hit it again, and this time, I instantly became aware of a sharp, acrid flavour filling my lungs and nostrils. Believing I'd hit gold, I took in as much smoke as possible and held it for a full 30 seconds before exhaling. I slumped back in my lawn chair and took note of the clear, cloud-tickled sky. About 5 seconds after laying back, I became aware of a kind of film drawing down over my vision. I recall thinking at the time that it looked like several large parameciums had landed on my eyeballs. They undulated and slid with ease, slippery living pools of near-invisible protoplasm, speckled and busy indeed. I watched the clouds and sky from behind this odd, primordial curtain, and then became aware of a warm numbness cascading down my cheeks and throat. My heart was beating rapidly, and I knew I was on my way. There was no fear at this time, yet there was this idea of fear. Fear floated over to the right side of my consciousness, and I sensed its selfish desire to assert itself. Instead, I turned my attention away, and to the sounds of the band still tuning up on stage. I knew that once the music began, the fear would not have the resources to stick around me, and I would be on my way towards something wonderful.
The band seemed to take forever to launch into a song though. I was aware that the noise of the frontman going on and on about how good it is to be here on this beautiful Friday, etc, etc, had taken on a deep, vibrating quality. It was as if the sound was being picked up and amplified not in my eardrums, but in the very centre of my body, and travelling outward from within. My heart began to beat faster, and the thought that this band may never play a song allowed the fear to draw in closer and begin to take hold. It was at this time that the music finally exploded out into the air, and I experienced a blast-off. The numbness that had begun on my face quickly cascaded down the rest of me, and I was separated entirely from my physical form. I closed my eyes, but the sky with its glorious clouds remained, but then began to shift and split as a series of brightly coloured spiral fractals spun down from beyond the sky. The lines of this fractal were thin, and clearly something small within them, too tiny to see, was moving as well. The cloud and sky space between the fractal lines suddenly darkened and began to pulse with a sickly purple bruised colour. I understood that this was the fear that was still travelling right along with me. The only part of my body that remained was my heart, which I became sure would soon explode. And then there was a voice. I use the word voice in the loosest sense, for what I really experienced was the knowing of another given to me. I heard it audibly, but felt it just as clearly and simultaneously saw the message as it unfurled on a bright white banner that drew itself across the sick, purple fear expanse, its edges attaching each one of the pretty fractal spirals. Written on the banner, clear as day, was the message, "You have taken a powerful psychedelic." This message, experienced visually, audibly, and within my consciousness, was undoubtedly female. There was no tone to lend it a friendly or unfriendly disposition. It was simply supplying me with information. I continued to soar forward. Another banner, voice, feeling, delivered by this female voice shot across my consciousness. It said, "We want to see you, but you have to slow down your breathing first. Take deep breaths." Upon receiving this advice, I was aware of a new presence of mind within me. While I was primarily in a state of heightened wonder and no small degree of panic, what rose up within me was a kind of no-nonsense, cold rationality that initiated within me a deep, rhythmic breathing exercise that I practiced often in meditation. As I breathed, the pulsing, sick, purple masses of fear began to dissipate, while the spiral lines grew thicker and expanded outwards. I picked up speed and was very, very faintly aware that far below where my body sat, a strong ocean wind was blowing against my face. Suddenly, I became aware of shapes that were attempting to break through the multicoloured surface of the fractal spirals. There was a pushing upwards, until finally, out popped a small, perfectly spherical and bright green head. It spun and smiled wide at me. Two of its eyes were just slits of hilarity, before fully popping out of the surface and began to dance along with the music. Then I spotted another, and then another, and soon the spiral fractal completed its formation of an endless tunnel, made up completely of these green dancing men. I was familiar with the accounts of machine elves, but these looked more like the Doozers from Fraggle Rock, which some of you might remember. They danced in unison and began to speak to me. "Hooray, you made it! We're so glad you're here. We've been waiting for you to find us again." I simply marvelled at this, and was distantly aware that back on Earth, my body was laughing. Every so often, a sickly purple head would pop out of the fractal, and suddenly there would be an angry little man, with a frown made of pure electricity. He would stare at me and say something profoundly distressing like, "Now you're dying. You're going insane forever. Your best friend hates you." However, before any real fear could gather itself, one or more of the happy green men would surround the purple guy and kick or karate chop him off the fractal and into a dark centre that was slowly revealing itself at the centre of everything. As they did this, they would say things like, "Oh, don't listen to him, he's just confused. He'll come back understanding better the next time. You're doing great. Hooray." I became suddenly aware of a tremendous insight into what I was actually experiencing. This insight was presented to me, again, through several mediums at once. I was being told it by the green men. I was seeing the truth of it in the pattern materialise before me, as though the mere existence of this image ensured it was true, as well as being struck by a strong familiarity from the experience as a whole. The insight was this. This was the force of the universe, of creation, of everything. It's continuously moving, working itself into higher and higher degrees of consciousness. The images before me were just that, images, created by my mind to give form to what is essentially formless. The green men illustrated this last point by suddenly looking at me and saying, "We can be whatever you want, we can be chipmunks," and then they became chipmunks. "We can be fire hydrants as well," and they all became fire hydrants. None of it matters. It doesn't matter. Hooray. And then returned to little green men. I understood that this dancing, this moving, was really them working towards the higher consciousness, and that back on Earth this gleeful dancing manifested in the acts of kindness, love, and generosity of people towards each other. I understood that our physical reality, including the notions of time and space, was merely a reflection caused by the vibrating energy of this process, and was not real in any sense of the word. The true nature of everything was vibration, and it emanated and danced around a singular point of nothingness. This nothingness, I came to understand, was all there ever was or ever will be. However, the notion of nothing naturally implies the idea of something, and that is what we truly are. The implication of possibility generated by the truth of utter nothingness. As if to demonstrate this point, I was shown snapshots of events from throughout my life, from infant years to events from that very day. The picture of the event, say for example, the birth of my daughter or me falling off the slide in 3rd grade, would fill my field of vision. Then it would freeze like a snapshot, and grow smaller and smaller, until the spiral fractal tunnel returned from the snapshot that was being held in the hands by one of the green men, and then they would toss it back into the nothingness. See? It's just a picture. Hooray. This is all that's real. Us. You. The concepts of us and me, and the very concept of separation as a whole, suddenly manifested itself as a giant billboard, and that too was snapshotted and tossed away into the nothing. This is all it is. Everything is one. You are it. Everyone is. This is it. This insight was celebrated by a massive hooray by the green men, and then they went on to say things like, "It's so simple. Yeah, you see it now. We're so glad you see it. It's you. It's everything." Then they all began to simultaneously don these black graduation caps and gowns. They removed a certificate of graduation from behind them, stamped it, signed it, and then held it up to me while giving me a big thumbs up. "Okay, it's back to work we go. Let's go. Hooray." The spiral tunnel gradually began to slow and grow thinner. From behind this vision, I began to make out the frail outlines of clouds and sky. The music continued to jam on, and my fingers began to tap the arms of the lawn chair. I was returning to my body. With my eyes now open, I could still see the little green men, who continued to dance in circles behind the sky. Faintly, they cried, "Come back again soon. We're always here. We'd love to see you. Good job today. Hooray." I sat up and looked at my friend, who promptly said, 15 minutes? You were there for 15 minutes? The very notion of time was still absurd to me, as I still felt primarily within the reality of the spiral truth, as opposed to the physical realm. This euphoric feeling of belonging and beauty remained with me throughout the weekend, though the exact nature and profound sense of truth and familiarity of the experience has begun to fade away. I have, however, continued to have had faint closed-eye visuals as late as last night, 2 days later. This account I came up with is the best I could surmise and approximate the experience. I cannot wait to go back there again and see some more.
A finite prepositionless blur. A DXM and Cannabis trip report by Hector the Crow, uploaded to Earwig July 13, 2008. I drank the extracted powder in a series of 10 sips. Immediately, my heart began pounding. I'd been gung-ho about this planned mental vacation for days, but upon ingesting the substance I began suffering the dread that always accompanies the come on. This time, it was more severe than ever. I began to think I'd done too much and was in for a hell ride at the very least. My fears seemed to be confirmed as the swoon came over me, a sort of clean alcohol-like intoxication. There was a fiery buzz which felt like my brain cells burning. It wasn't supposed to be this hot. My hands started tingling, then my body became totally numb. And then, I slipped into the semi-lucid delirium. This wasn't supposed to happen for hours. Fuck. My thoughts quickly spiraled into a negative feedback loop. I flushed my mind down the toilet of my soul into the dark, grimy, internal plumbing of my pseudo-masochistic psyche. Shite. I was nothing, and I was everything. Everything was nothing. A rotting, stinking nothing. A scab maroon, Sucrit's crimson alpha, and a black suicide omega, all of no consequence. I'd created all perception through my being, and now I was going to destroy that being. I was going to be the god that failed. I was manufacturing meaning, and the meaning was, this is it, the truth, the absurdity, firsthand. It was a glimpse of limits, ugly jagged contours and hard edges. Then the voice started talking to me. You have to face this truth in order to be enlightened. I didn't want to face anything, but I didn't want to run back into my hidey hole of delusion either, not after being thrust out of orbit and twisted into a new spin resonance. Stepping outside into the cool fresh air, and escaping the reek of the Sucrit smoothie, helped me for a while, but the panic eventually invaded this sanctuary. I went back inside and called a friend. She'd been my saviour in unholy hubristic schemes before. Gretchen, are you there? It's me, Faust. I've got myself into a bit of a mindfuck again. I'm on the wagon. Or is that off? And where's the destination? And is there really a wagon anyway? Oh crap. I don't know what the prepositional matrix is here, or there, or anywhere. Gretchen calmed me enough to keep me out of the sewers of my mind, but I felt her presence was needed. She came over and kept me distracted from the existential inferno. I agreed it would be a good idea to smoke a joint, so I took a few tokes. This immediately reversed the polarity of the trip from negative to positive, while intensifying the disorientation. There was substantial visual distortion. Everything jittered, staggered, jerked away from focus in a taunting smear. Double vision, triple vision, morpho vision, strobe vision, field of view skewed texture, two-dimensional depth condensation, two-headed Gretchen in a flowing, flowering split, googly-eyed. Becca, my cat on top of a cart, bouncing up into view again and again, boing, 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 spinning, looking down, seeing alien continents in the kitchen floor, linoleum tile coastlines. I was a Brobdingnagian towering above creation. Prepositions scrambled, inverted, flanged, fused. Holding my computer mouse, I noticed that my left and right hands felt inverted. There was no ambiguity about this feeling. Although I moved normally, the sensation persisted. Mixed signals to limbs alternated with complete anesthesia. Body felt spring-loaded. All actions were sweeping arcs, supermotion. I often felt too tall and sometimes floating like a ghost. Sound was difficult to describe as well. distant, disconnected. Time alternately dilated and condensed. There were episodes of slow motion, and I heard myself stretching out syllables for ages but in a normal tone of voice in a normal delivery attempt. Then came the fugue state, mental polyphony, multiple voices in my head. Not literal voices, but lines of thought, forming cognitive counterpoint and divergent mind's eye visual streams. A highly artistic flange. A multi-dimensional synesthetic music video. This coalesced into the form of ink-rendered hallucinations. My visions, motific mental imagery sprouting from the fractal seed of the artwork I'd been drawing the last few weeks. The infinitely regressing pen scratched biomechanical landscapes gave way to a fluorescent spinning circuit, a tourist cave half fused with a rapid counterclockwise circumnavigation of the first floor interior of my house. In the cerebral extract of this information, I sensed profundity in and of itself, importance as purity, something deep and yet negatively charged. The green tide pool, the fornicating fountain, the finite flow. Something to face, or something to get past? In this blur, it was hard to find the edges of good and evil. I was near a state of debauchery. Euphoria and dysphoria blended into a singular emotional intensity. I've been rocked to both extremes until the emotional waves superimposed and neutralised. I was flooded with alien intuition, inanimate insights under cartoon cover, set to a soundtrack, out of the black, slowly squeezing into my mind, agents of the static, shrouded in the light. I made some attempts at dragging my pseudo-satanic tripmate into the vortex of nihilism I'd torn in the fabric of reality, for company in the semantic tide pool of affinity. Sick, but she was on an angular plane. The bisection was Hunter S. Thompson crazy. Ah, yes, I remember. Gonzo Perfecto, a fish jump, a Neil Armstrong step. Staggering crystalline confusion with mashed potatoes of cliched expression and a gravy of novelty. I was being given a tour of a future initiation, overseen by an inner entity, the me that is the dark half of reality. I was being shown a stark and terrible, yet noble and beautiful truth, but I couldn't fully comprehend it, because I'd already declined to face it when the delirium came on. My inner entity accepted that I wasn't ready, and would not force the vision on me. But the sense I got from that oblique imagery with its non-local semantic attachment was that existence is profoundly finite. There is no me, and there is only me. I am all that is, and when I end, there will be nothing. A few hours later, still riding the storm, in a surprisingly lucid transcription, I wrote down the Nietzsche quote, "When you look into the void looks into you." If I was a psychological reductionist, I would say that this was an amplification of my obsessive fears over death. I work easy, I slack hard. Faust shrugged. Mephistopheles had his cake and ate it too, with a fork too long for the damned to use. He was a moving gravity well of hell, bending the rules to his will. I was right. It was to be edited, and this is it. The packaging of the memory, the wrapping of the all-purpose void, the vacuum seal, the surface. To be put under the tree and not opened until Judgment Day when my old pal Mephistopheles comes to tempt me once again. Will I have the nerve to accept? To indulge indulgence itself? To sacrifice to the revelry? To summon Satan and complete the trip? To face the finite? Here's what I wrote while in the grip of the trip. I'll never be able to explain this night. It was crazy. It defied the laws of metaphysics and physics. It defied everything just for the hell of it. It was definition cognition. It was another tango with the universe. Damn, I can't explain. It was set to a Mahler symphony. It watched over Gretchen and me. Ham and honey mustard sauce on the side. It is uncredible. Eine kleine Miktmusik. It is a ridiculous catharsis with headphones on. It will be edited. It is it. What do I write? Fugue collapsed. State vector decayed. Line pile of pulsating limonide dream contours plagiaulated nicely onward forward. Flow, 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 low, drip, tripe, type, tip, tripe. I've broken through. To the afterglow plateau. I've got a chestnut in my hand. I've seen what I will eventually have to face. Emerging from the haze, I don't know what to say. I was elsewhere. I got the prototype, I saw things, hung around with a real hallucination. I'm still reeling. Can't articulate properly. Jesus. This is a Sigma aftermath. Still roiling in dextrose ripple, higher than I thought. Oh my god, was all I could say. There's something I'll have to face one day. My visions. Everyone's got their own. It's a preparation for death, just like the gurus say. Gretchen left after a reasonable interlude of supervision. I walked around in a daze, whispering words of rumoured rapture until sufficiently fatigued to climb into bed. I remained high as a space kite. I wonder if I would ever come down. I closed my eyes, but I would not sleep. Instead, I entered a perfectly benign, half-sleeping state in which visual nirvana filled the cracks in consciousness. It was the music video I remembered from my first DXM experience. A rolling, consonant collage of alien sounds and whirling, writhing textures. The voice was gone now, and I knew I no longer had to think. There were no associated insights, just a soothing, grooving, washing stimulus, retirement for my overworked brain. The beatific end to this dextro universe, this microcosm. What do I make of this? I read what I wrote during the rave, when dressed in the Emperor's new clothes, fractionally phenomenal garments inversely spun of an old deja thread. I sensed sincerity in the often nonsensical sentences. It was an honest transcription of the chaotic convergence. I maintain that dextromethorphan is my friend, though an enigmatic ally, and one to be called upon rarely. I find that dextro is best mediated with my more stable pharmacological partner, Cannabis. I'm sure all three of us will meet again, but not so soon. I've got to give it some time.
Riding Her Voice, an LSD, DMT and cannabis trip report, posted by Elevation to Era.org, October 9th, 2007. I'd just finished Daniel Pinchbeck's marvellously weaved metaphysical memoir, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. And after vicariously experiencing all of his psychedelic trips, shamanic rituals and cosmic revelations, I was eager to take my own psychospiritual-delic journey. It had been months since my last trip, so I uncovered my last 3 tabs of LSD I'd been saving, a very strong batch of fluff, which has given me many wondrous, colourful experiences before. I tried to convince my friend Z to join me, but ever since she encountered demons deep within the underbelly of Boston's Charles River on an LSD trip, she's had to fear. Even though I consider myself a pretty experienced psychonaut, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, 2CB, 2CE, 2CI, salvia, Mali, ecstasy, plus all sorts of combinations. I'd never actually experienced anything beyond myself, or any kind of other presence, whether for good or for ill. Even though I saw it terrorise her mind, I could not help but feel envy for her experience, because after all the trips I'd been on, I'd never had a truly spiritual or mystical experience. The trip always just seemed like something going on in my head, so she stayed relatively sober, while I put a tiny white strip of blotter under my tongue. I spent the next 30 to 45 minutes sitting around, smoking a bowl or two, and enjoying that familiar, curious anxiety that slowly creeps over my consciousness as it begins to expand. We eventually left indoors and got in the car, Z was driving of course, and took the dog to the beach, which was just a few blocks away. Before we even made it to the sand, I was entranced by the sound of the surf. I remember telling Z that the sea is a symphony. I let the waves wash my feet and ankles, and felt such a strong pull from the ocean. It felt so good. I considered going swimming, but lacking a bathing suit, my shorts instead weighed down with cigarettes, weed, glass, and DMT among other things, I stayed on dry land. Z and I wandered around a little, smoked a bowl, and then she decided she wanted to go, while I decided to stay. I walked back to the car with her to coerce the dog into the back seat, and then they were gone. I found myself alone on the beach now. I could see maybe 25 feet in front of me before the ground disappeared into the luminescent haze of the sandy air above it. Despite this, the stars still shone incredibly brightly, and when I looked up at them, they danced and twinkled, forming some kind of geometric net that resembled the appearance of a canyon from directly above. It was slowly descending upon me, but never reaching me, and when I looked down at the sand, the rocks seemed to be growing out of the ground beneath the surf, something which they actually do in certain areas, but whether or not it was happening here, something I still am not sure of. The phenomenon was at the very least heightened considerably. Everything around me was coming alive now. This once empty beach was now surrounding me with its presence. The streetlights behind the dunes seemed to wax and wane, sometimes illuminating the haze into a brilliant artificial orange glow, sometimes seemingly disappearing altogether. The effect only added to size and distance distortions I was experiencing. Everything was moving. Nothing was concrete. The haze created a small dome around me in which I could clearly see. It was my cloud of perception, and it followed me wherever I went, keeping me out of reach from the foggy unknown world beyond, where shadows and shapes were manifesting and disappearing all at the same time. I found a comfortable seat in the dune flanked by 2 hills, and it was here that I smoked the remaining crystals and resin that was left in my DMT pipe. Right after I inhaled, long and slow, the haze intensified, and I could barely even make out the water in front of me. It was probably less than 20 feet away. The DMT effects were relatively subtle. First, the geometric net of the stars was noticeably more apparent and complex, but still following the same slow, wiggly descent. Then, when I stood up in a moment of paranoia and saw my cloud of perception to be maybe 10 feet in radius, I had the distinct feeling that I was no longer where I thought I was, that I had journeyed somewhere entirely different. There were more shadow figures wandering in the fog now, though never coming into view, and as I passed a mass of beach seaweed, I remember thinking that it looked like I was clearly on some alien planet. My mind was still accelerating, and the symphony of the sea was ever present, slowly infiltrating my consciousness. Though I didn't realize it at the time, I was finding distractions everywhere, and even though I knew on a conscious level that I was just on the beach at night, I also knew, both consciously and unconsciously, that I had stumbled into a place I've never seen before, and this feeling was only intensifying as I wandered further down the coast, to a land where the gradual slope of the dunes transforms into steep cliffs. Then, just as I saw another shadow figure, she saw me, and I saw that it was a mutual, simultaneous observance. She seemed to say something to me, and I seemed to respond. What was literally said, or what it sounded like, I have absolutely no idea. But I realized now that she was bidding me to follow, and I was accepting. I began walking in a direction, which was roughly the same direction I had already been heading, but there was such a distinct presence out there now, an otherness that was following me, surrounding me even, but staying just outside of my sphere of perception. I kept looking around me, only to find my own shadow and the sound of my own footsteps, but it was as if I could almost touch them. I could feel them getting stronger. I was also entering an incredibly chaotic state of mind, a schizophrenic-like stream of consciousness where there were multiple voices and thoughts in my head simultaneously, and I could not differentiate one from the other, much less my own from my other. I found a spot on the cliff where the rocks jutted out, providing a small shelter if one were to sit right against the wall. I sat down here and began to pack a bowl of cannabis. Less than a minute later, I was fleeing from the sight in panic, because I saw and felt the rocks above me begin to crumble apart. I ventured back to make sure the cliff was still standing, as I knew it was, and that I was just tripping face. I walked a bit farther until I stopped to lean against the rock. It felt so strange to touch it, and as I was gazing at it, trying to collect myself, the rocks again began to crack and crumble apart right in front of me. The unknown had now entered my sphere of perception, and matter itself was dissolving before my eyes. I again fell back from them in utter and complete terror. As I backed up, and as the fear grew, the cracks grew massive, climbing up the walls until I finally calmed myself down, realizing it was actually being brought on by my emotions themselves. I considered turning back at this point, but I knew I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if I did. I was out there looking for something, and I knew I would find it if I just kept on looking. So I ventured further, following more shadow figures in the fog. There were so many of them now, their presence still intensifying. I kept walking toward her ever-changing shape, and as she came into view, I saw that it was a stack of rocks, maybe 3.5 feet high, but stacked perfectly among the rest of the stones on the beach. It struck me, and I remember looking at it, curious, but I did not stop. I kept walking, entering a still higher level of schizophrenia as I did. Everything was so jumbled, and I eventually sat down against the rocks again, finally smoking that bowl. I was tripping so incredibly hard at this point. I remember telling myself and all the other voices in my head that I'm just sitting, which made me laugh out loud when I made the connection with the Buddha, and just how ridiculous this all really was. I began listening to the symphony of the sea again, and I was being lulled into a trance. I did not realize it at the time, but it was her. She had led me there, egged me on, and she was singing to me now. Her voice was transcendent. Once in her trance, I found myself to be in a multi-dimensional sonic space. The rhythm and structure of her song was creating these pulsating, swirling, rhythmic harmonies that were of a complexity so incredible, so beautiful, that I've never heard anything like this before in my entire life. And I'd been to the beach before. I've heard the sound of the surf crashing against the sea and sand, but never like this. I began to shake. She was stringing me along one of those harmonic columns of energy, spinning, swirling, whirring. And then, right after a momentary eternity of silence, the string snapped, it unraveled, and I heard the deep, guttural roar of a massive wave. I knew it immediately when I heard it, and I wept at its beauty. Tears streamed down my face as I realized what actually just happened. I heard a wave for what a wave really is. Not some rising hill of water that breaks on itself as it approaches the coast, but a huge, swirling formation of energy that journeys miles a minute in its constant cycle. As this all sunk in, I was still trembling. My pulse was tremoring and I was grasping for air. My body, it had just been sitting there this whole time. I began to channel her, and she channeled me, and the spirit of the water had led me there, against the rocks, where I could hear her sing. The rocks she had led me to were shaped perfectly to resonate the swirling, spinning divine rhythmic harmonies of the waves deep in the sea. I could ride her voice for miles. It was one of the most powerful experiences of my life. Everything was clear now. I was lucid in this spirit realm, and I was in harmony with her, dancing with her. The presence I had felt encircling me was now a part of me. I spent a long time out there, hypnotized and enraptured by her breathtaking roars and elaborate cadence. It resonated with my very soul. She was truly a part of me now, and I was in ecstasy. I eventually wandered back to Z, who was asleep. I woke her up to tell her my story and smoke a freshly packed bong. Even blocks up from the coastline, I could still hear her, and I could feel her song below my feet. We got in the car and drove around, and after some meandering throughout the sleeping city, we pulled onto a street where a massive tractor trailer was trying to pull into an alley. I felt the pulsating in my soul once again, but this time it was totally different. And then, all of a sudden, the power lines above us got ripped apart, exploding in a cloud of white sparks. I yelled at Z to back up, because if the pole was coming down, it would have come down right on top of us, and then again, a second explosion. Luckily, nothing fell this time, and everyone was alright. I told her I anticipated it, feeling it before seeing it, and she said she felt it too. We thought it might have been a small earthquake, but we honestly haven't been able to corroborate this conjecture. In all likelihood, the truck got caught on one of the wires and snapped it apart. This actually had a similar apprehensive feeling as the wave, but was more of a cosmic punch to the soul than a trance-inducing song. We spent the rest of the night wandering between the beach and the car, and wherever I went, whether it was an open beach where the sound didn't resonate the same way, I could still hear her. I could still hear the swirling get faster and faster until it snapped and unraveled, exploding in the crashing of a wave. Eventually, when I finally lay in my bed well after dawn, I was lulled to sleep by her. And when I woke the next day, and even now, her song still resonates in my soul. The sea sounds forever different to me now after this. I went back to the same spot I was in the next night, but this time in the normal material world. Above the haze and the stars were less visible, the rocks were no longer stacked up, and I could only barely hear that whirring energy resonance. But was still there. The most astonishing thing to me about this whole experience is the fact that I actually got a response from a seemingly unresponsive universe. I was out there looking for spirits or some kind of other. I don't even really know. My normal day-to-day life feels very different now. Even though I was in such an altered state, as this surely ranks among the strongest trips I've ever had. And even though I'm a little unsure about the linear progression of events, to be honest, I have no doubt about what I heard in that eternal moment. She sang to me.
Teo Nanakat, The Teacher of Plants, a Mushrooms and Cannabis Strip Report by Aries, uploaded to Earwidge July 3rd, 2009. Below is my story of meeting Teo Nanakat, the Aztec mushroom spirit. This experience has deepened my respect for the very real intelligence contained in the mushroom and other plants. Not only was I given profound insights, but mushrooms physically interacted with me, moving my body and teaching me about the plant world. My car broke down earlier in the day, forcing me to curtail my Saturday plans and spend the afternoon at home. I decided to commune with the mushroom, since it was a gorgeous sunny day and I was feeling unusually calm and at peace. I even felt a vague sense of purpose, as if my car breaking down was intentional, so that I would be at home for this journey. I feel great respect for mushroom spirit, and as usual I cleared my mind, spoke my intent to the mushrooms as I was about to eat, and told Mushroom I love him, then asked Mushroom to teach me about trust. I'd been feeling a strange separation from my friends, and I knew it was because I was missing a depth of trust in them. I ate about 3 grams, just a portion of my stash. I usually eat piece by piece until the mushrooms let me know I've hit the right dose. I smoked a bowl of cannabis, then meditated with the music of Bach for about 30 minutes, glowing in a stream of sunlight from my back porch. I thanked the mushroom spirit for his wisdom and caring, and again repeated my love for him. This was a great way to endear mushroom to you, though of course your love and gratitude must be sincere. As the mushrooms took over my senses, I moved to my bedroom. I laid in bed and closed my eyes. I kept repeating the word trust, and over time, Mushroom began speaking back, reminding me to keep on trusting.
He made it clear that the lesson in trust I desire begins with trust in him. As my ego dissolved, about an hour into the trip, Mushroom showed me the great abundance and miracle that is my life. I suddenly saw the vast gifts I had created and been given, coupled with the infinite range of life's possibilities, and I felt a deep gratitude for everything in my life. I saw myself as a gorgeous, ethereal being, strong in ability, able to move anywhere, able to make anything happen. This was not an ego trip, of course. It was a spiritual revelation about the truth of my being, the truth of all human beings, that it is our ego that blocks us from realizing and manifesting the possibilities. A few insights and visions passed, then I felt a pressure on me, a force delving deep into my spirit. Instinctively I blocked it, but Mushroom asked me to trust, that I had to get at something in my soul. He said it would hurt momentarily, but that it was necessary to clear this blockage. I said, okay, I trust you. I actually felt something like fingers dig around inside me and pluck something loose, and suddenly I began retching, letting out dry heaves, coughs and tears. I knew that I was purging out whatever blockage Mushroom had just released. A tremendous wave of intense emotional energy surged and overtook me. I began bawling as I saw my friends together in a group, smiling and waving at me, inviting me to play with them. I realised I'd been unduly mistrusting them, not seeing their love for me, completely missing the boat of friendship, and I surged with love for them and for myself. The intense emotion lasted a while, then as it faded I realised I had to pee, but Mushroom wouldn't let me. He told me again to trust him and trust my body, that I don't have to pee right now, that I have more lessons to learn first. After a few more insights, Mushroom gave me permission to get up and go to the bathroom. I did so, washed my hands, then realised I was losing control of my fingers. I felt a force from within me trying to move my body, as if I were possessed. I closed my eyes and could see a vague human form, not my own, entering my body. I gave Mushroom permission to take me. I reiterated my trust and relaxed my body completely and offered myself to him. Suddenly, my arms began moving of their own accord. I soon realised that I was being pulled towards the front of my apartment. I followed the tug, my arms outstretched, as if hands were gripping them and pulling me. The tug then became a yank, and a barrel to my front window, where my houseplants are kept. My body collapsed in front of the largest plant. I'm afraid I don't know the species name, and I became awash in the plant's energy. I held one of the larger leaves to my face, and I could feel intense healing energy entering my body. I began uttering deep, guttural, lion-like breaths as the energy of the plant coursed through me. Mushroom then began teaching me. He told me this plant specialises in healing, and that if I approach it correctly I can tap into its energy whenever I want. As I continued to bask in the energy, Mushroom then told me something startling. He said humans were long ago taken over by anti-plant spirits, spirits bent on destroying the plants, and that since that time there has been a battle raging between the plant spirits and the anti-plant spirits. He said the plants have been trying desperately to wake up humanity to this, but humans are still under the spell of the other forces. I declared my alliance with the plant spirits, and I pledged to learn and live as a plant steward. I sat back, my body limp, feeling rejuvenated, not to mention in utter awe at what was happening. Then my arms began moving again. As they rose up and moved around, I asked what was going on. I said, "You're enjoying messing with my body, aren't you?" I could then feel a sigh in my mind, and my arms suddenly went limp. What I didn't realise was Mushroom was trying to get me to get up and move, but since I didn't respond, he let go in frustration and instructed the plant that was just healing me to push away. The healing energy I was soaking in suddenly became rigid, and I was physically pushed away by the plant. My body felt the force of it and moved back, which confused me at first. Thinking the plant was angry with me, I stood up and apologised to it for whatever I did, or didn't do, but then my right arm started moving and was again tugged, this time towards the back of my apartment. It was as if a hand was gripping my arm, pulling me towards my back porch. I again barreled in the direction of Mushroom's pull, but when I reached the porch I yanked my arm back and said, "Wait a minute." I told Mushroom I was confused by this interaction, that I don't really like being yanked around, and that I needed a moment to get my bearings. He gave me a minute, then started lightly pulling at my arm, towards my back window. I looked out the window and saw my garden in the backyard. I acknowledged the garden, and the mushroom said, "Good, now let's go outside." Once again my arm was being tugged, this time towards the door to outside. I live in a densely populated city, therefore I was very reluctant, telling Mushroom I was uncomfortable going outside while tripping, since people could see me, and I sure as heck didn't want people to see me with my arms flailing around. Much to my surprise, Mushroom grabbed my foot and spun my leg around. He then grabbed both arms, tugging me towards outside. I reiterated my fear of being seen, but Mushroom repeated his request to trust him, so I said, okay, but told him I had to put my outside slippers on first. I couldn't find the slippers though, so I asked Mushroom for help. He told me they were in my kitchen under the ironing board. I checked and voila, there they were. I put on my slippers and walked towards the door. I could feel Mushroom leading me, tugging at my spirit as I walked towards the garden. I kneeled in front of the new strawberry plants that were just planted there, but then I began to feel self-conscious just kneeling and tripping while I could hear my neighbours, wondering what they'd think if they saw me. So I hurried back inside, which made Mushroom a bit frustrated. He told me again to trust him, that if I felt self-conscious kneeling by the garden, I could instead sit in a chair, so if someone saw me I'd just be relaxing, enjoying the evening breeze. I wasn't sure there was a chair in my backyard, but I trusted him and went back outside. True to his word, a lawn chair was sitting against the back wall of my house, so I pulled it up and took a seat. Mushroom told me to look down at the grass. As I did so, the lawn began morphing like it was an animate life, the energy of the grass being made visually apparent to me. My cat was by my side this whole time, which was unusual since he usually likes to roam, and he was chewing on some of the grass. I asked Mushroom if the grass minded my cat stomping and eating them, and he said of course they don't mind, that's what the grass is for. Indeed, that is what all plants are for, nourishment and healing. It is when we cut and burn and trash that the plants get angry with us. I then felt Mushroom wanting me to get up. At this point he was fading, and he had a resultant urgency, tugging at me to move. I got up, thinking he wanted me to take a walk. I walked out into the alley behind my house, but I was misinterpreting Mushroom's request. No matter where I walked, Mushroom kept trying to pull me back the other way. It wasn't until later that I realised Mushroom was pulling me back to my garden, but his messages were so weak by this point I was getting frustrated and not understanding them, and so was he. I walked around the block twice, back and forth through my alley, thinking I was supposed to be getting some sort of clue. I eventually slumped back into the lawn chair and asked Mushroom for one final sign. A robin swooped in and perched on my neighbour's garage. It faced me and sang a little song and then took over my head. The garden was directly in between me and the robin, a clear sign of where Mushroom wanted me to go. I got up to get close to the garden again, but then by the time that I did that, Mushroom was too weak to teach me anything. I asked Mushroom if there was anything more, or if I can go back inside, and Mushroom gave me one last tug in exasperation, pulling me in one final annoyed effort towards my house, as if to say, fine, go back inside, I'm through with you anyway. I could feel his disappointment in my missing of his lesson. I went back into my apartment and laid down on the bed. I was feeling awful, like I really had let Mushroom down. I got up and put my hands into my stash, feeling the remaining mushrooms vibrating in resonance against my fingers, and I told Mushroom that I love him and trust him, and I apologised for not getting his lesson. His last message to me was, trust that I love you too.
Life, Death, Rebirth. An MDMA, LSD and cannabis trip report by New Rainbow Child, uploaded to Earwid, October 7th, 2010. This experience was the most intense foray into psychedelia that I've ever had. It was also the single best and worst night of my life. It started on a regular Saturday night. I'd just obtained some great molly to my excitement, as I hadn't had good stuff in many months. My friend H and I were just chilling at my apartment. I was kind of hesitant to take it for whatever reason, but knew that I would still thank myself in the end. I weighed out around 100 milligrams and parachuted it. I began to feel a little odd and knew I was coming up. Then, in about 40 minutes, it hit me completely. I was rolling harder than ever before. I began to dance ecstatically and H put on some music. I was just massaging my whole body and talking a mile a minute. H was completely sober, but I tried to get her to open up to me completely and began psychoanalyzing her life inadvertently. She told me that everything I was saying was true, but she hadn't come to terms with it yet and needed to mule it over. At this point I decided to take some acid on a whim, so I went to my stockpile and dropped 3 hits of this amazing Rainbow Children blotter I had. H expressed some concern, as I had not originally intended to do any acid. I was completely confident in my decision though, and couldn't have been more happy with myself and what I was going to experience. H asked me if I wanted to go outside and run with her, and I replied with a definite yes. I got some water and a pacifier to chew on for the road. As we were leaving, our friends John and Joey popped by randomly and we vaporised a bowl together. I was really happy to see them, and they wished me the best of luck on my trip. After they left, we set down the neighbourhood in a jog. I ran until I noticed my heart was beating very fast and I was getting lightheaded. I listened to the signs of my body and decided to slow down and drink some water to cool off. At this point the acid really kicked in and I felt like I was popping in and out of the space-time domain and dancing with the cosmos. We made it to a small elementary school park and I immediately lay down in the grass of a field. I looked out at the sky and saw the most beautiful cloud formations and the stars appeared to be raining out of the sky. I was so happy and had never seen so much beauty before. Everything was alive. Everything I looked at was breathing in the energy of life and absolutely flowing. I could see every molecule that composed everything I saw, no matter how far or close away it was. All my senses were enhanced, and I experienced them as one, beyond the senses. I began to get astounding and glorious revelations. I saw that everything was composed of one basic building block fractal that would create patterns to give off the appearance of form. I knew that this fractal was pure and absolute love. The creator and the creation fused as one. God, energy, light, whatever you wish to call it, this is what it was. And I realised that nothing was static either. Everything was always moving, flowing, going through a continuous cycle of life, death and rebirth. I realised that although it was always changing, it was infinite, and to be part of the cycle is what it means to be alive. I saw everything that appeared to be still was simply slowly moving particles of this energy life force, vibrating at such a low rate that our ordinary senses perceive it as solid. I almost cried for joy at this realisation. All was love. All was one. I reflected on the concept of the Om, and understood it completely. I also realised that since everything was composed of love or God, and that everything was whole at every moment, I could never be separate from God. I was God. God was inside of me, and God was everything. This thought gave me so much comfort because I knew I would never be alone. As I was telling this to H, she asked me where fear fit into the picture. I instantly knew that fear was only a lack of awareness of love, and it is only a flaw of perception. I continued to ponder and gaze at the sky, watching the clouds dance and flow with rainbow iridescence around the moon. Sometimes I felt like I was right up there with them. After a while a light turned on in the school and H told me she thought she saw someone. We were trespassing, so we decided to just leave and not take any chances. We went back to my apartment and I lay on a yoga mat outside and continued to stare at the heavens and talk to her ecstatically. She told me I looked absolutely comfortable, and I replied that I was. I decided to paint and began to mix colours randomly and paint an erratic pattern all over the canvas. She told me that she enjoyed how free I was being, and I smiled and continued to paint until I was out of space. I didn't want to come back for a while and decided to take 2 more hits. I contemplated taking more Molly and even some shrooms, but decided not to get too crazy. At this point I began to try to talk to H again about her life, because I wanted her to find the peace and love that I had found also. When she spoke to me I could see which parent had given her which specific personality traits, and her face actually morphed to portray either parent, which I found absolutely crazy. I was still tripping madly at this point, and space and time was so skewed that I was having a lot of trouble staying in a linear conversation, as my mind was bouncing all over the place. I told her everything I had realised, and that she could have it too. I decided that I would give her the same illumination I had discovered, since I had discovered the power of creation by calling it out of the universe. This is when things started to get really crazy. I knew that to transmit the enlightenment, I would have to put it into a shape that she could access. I asked her what she wanted to be, what she most clearly identified with, what she was most passionate about, so I could mould the energy into shape for her to access. She kept on replying that she didn't know, and this exasperated and frightened me. For some reason I felt that she was right here experiencing my consciousness with me, and couldn't fathom why she couldn't see it. She began to get defensive, and talked about how she often struggles with depression in life. This is when my trip got really bad. The molly had worn itself through, and I realised that it wasn't coming back. I began to feel like our friendship was over. I was moving on, choosing to live completely in the light, whereas she was still partially enveloped by darkness. I wanted her to come with me, but she wasn't ready. She was still afraid. I thought I would lose her completely, and this greatly saddened me, for her sake especially, because she wouldn't understand what I had. All the energy I'd called out of the universe to give to her was still hanging over my head, enveloping me. I couldn't put it back, so I absorbed it and it became all of her fear and sadness. This is when I went to hell. I quickly and shakily said goodnight to H, who was in the process of passing out. She asked if I was okay, and I lied because I knew that there was nothing she could do to help me, especially if this is the point I'd gotten to trying to help her. I walked out onto my balcony again. I'd left the door open and saw my black cat disappear into the darkness. I think she jumped into my neighbour's balcony, but I was tripping so hard I felt like I had lost her forever. This triggered my absolute descent into the lower realms of hell. I began to feel like absolute shit. I was lost, wandering aimlessly looking for the peace, love and beauty I had felt before, but all I could see now was darkness and terror. I tried to go to sleep, but felt like H was a giant spider in a cocoon who wove a machine-like web sucking out my soul. I got up and began to pace the house. I tried to do everything I could think of that would make me feel better. Meditation, yoga, chakra cleansing, cleaning, painting, singing, dancing, watching Planet Earth. Nothing helped. I simply couldn't focus at all on anything I tried. I took some melatonin and gabapentin to try and kill my trip early, so I could sleep and at least find peace there. I wanted to die. I felt like I was eternally trapped by pain, and demons began to haunt my thoughts. They sounded like really ghetto, trashy fucked up people, and kept repeating a barrage of cuss words, shouting into my brain, bitch ass nig, motherfucker, shit, douchebag, asshole, fuck, and so on. I couldn't make them go away. This madness went on for about 3 hours as well. Finally I decided to eat because I hadn't in over 15 hours and felt kind of weak. I fixed myself some really healthy cereal with raisins, strawberries and raspberries, and then went outside to eat it. It was about 7, and the sun had begun to rise in a fuchsia glow behind the clouds. I turned and saw a black flash, and my cat reappeared on my balcony and went inside. I felt so much relief with her return, I almost cried again. With this sign and the new day, I finally found hope and redemption, or rebirth. I gazed at the tree out of my window and still saw the fractal molecules of love that it was flowing with. I stared at it intently and saw it breathing, full of energy and life. I watched the water vapour molecules that formed clouds in the distance morph and swirl with the wind. They turned into images of people and animals, and I saw a historic play take place inside of them. Ancient-looking Asian women were washing clothes in a river one moment, and then the scene would shift to a tiger hunting its prey, and so on and so forth. This captivated me, and I felt like it was a web of history of the earth. I began to let go of the fear until it was no longer dominating me. After a while the visuals stopped, and I realised my trip was over. It was now about 8:30, and I was ready to sleep. I smoked a bowl and went to bed. This trip was really complicated. It was the most intense, enlightening and painful one I had ever had. I spent the complete following day putting my mind back together and coming to terms with reality. It was my first candy flip, first bad acid trip, and most acid I had ever taken. Of these things, it probably won't be my last. Because I entered a lower realm, I really wanted to try and dose again, but decided to give my mind at least a week or so to recover. Even though the ending to this trip was only bittersweet, it changed my life for the better. I feel like I truly understand the mysteries of life and my purpose in the puzzle, to give and manifest love. I decided to start attending Kundalini yoga at least twice a week, as well as to give smoking weed a break. For the past 3 months I had been smoking incessantly, and for the first time in my life began experiencing lapses of memory that comes with THC saturation. I no longer would allow myself to abuse my mind, my body, and my soul by not appreciating marijuana for the sacrament it is. This experience was yesterday, but I've been keeping true to myself so far, and intend to hold my enlightenment within and continue tripping periodically to stay in touch with my true nature. Hi everyone, here today with a submission from a subscriber and with a little funny anecdote before we start the trip report. So this guy who messaged me, he messaged me on Instagram asking me if he could send a trip report in, and I noticed that he is an MC and photographer and co-owner of Mashed Up Audio UK, which is a music label, and they released DMB, and obviously I DJ DMB and I produced some DMB tracks. Obviously that got me interested, and yeah, my mate actually lives down in Brighton. He went and moved down there recently, and he knows one of the DJs on the label. I think he's the founder of it, Dial Up. So yeah, I couldn't believe that. The chances of that are absolutely mad. Synchronicities out their head. So yeah, if you're a big fan of DMB, then please go and check them out on Instagram because they've got some seriously scorching stuff. But without further ado, let's get stuck into this report. You're in for a treat with this one. A 45 Liberty Cap and 4 grams of weed story by Sean. Strap up, it's a long one. I can remember almost everything about this trip. It starts off beautiful and ends up terrifying, so make sure to stick around. So before I get into this incredible story, I'm going to start off by setting the scene. I'm a 20-year-old man who's 6 foot and only 8 stone 6. I've had one previous trip on mushrooms, a 1.7 gram trip of golden teachers. I didn't feel a lot other than a slight childlike feeling, and my thumb looked bigger when I was rolling my joint. Other than this trip, the only other psychedelic I've done was on and off daily weed use for about 5 years. Before I even started smoking weed, I was fascinated by psychedelics. I'd been into lucid dreaming and astral projection since a very young age. Later on in life, when I was about 14, I'd heard some people say psychedelics can help you reach the astral realm on YouTube, and decided to take a further dive into the subject to learn as much as I could without actually doing them. When I was 15, I started smoking weed, and haven't stopped since other than tolerance breaks and running out of money, etc. I'd almost forgot about traditional psychedelics until 1920, when I started to go down a spiritual discovery path to help me cope with the fear of death. I'd also like to add I've had one near-death experience that I will later refer to in the trip story itself. I dived deeply into YouTube and Reddit to yet again find out more about the spiritual side of psychedelics. I remember in this period of time, for some reason, I kept getting weird flashbacks from when I was a kid, and I felt like the universe was trying to talk to me. I remember very vividly I had binge watched at least 20 DMT trip stories one night, a lot from Vivec and Tales from the Trip. Then the next day after this binge, I was getting a lift to a rave with my friends, and I was talking to them about some of the fascinating DMT stories I'd been listening to. While I was talking about this, a car overtook us and started swerving in front of us, and the number plate said DMT 3739. Not sure on the exact numbers, but you get the idea. In this period, I kept getting lots of more weird, spooky coincidences like this, and I truly believed it was a sign to dive into my consciousness and learn something. So a couple months after it was shroom season in the UK. My first time looking for them, I met another guy who lived in the same little village as me that I had somehow never seen before. He was very nice and was into foraging mushrooms as well, so I added him on Instagram and hadn't spoke to him since. I then attempted to pick some Liberty Caps so I could have my first proper psychedelic experience. I don't really count the first Golden Teacher one. Unfortunately, as I live in the south of England, I was only able to get 10 of them, which wasn't enough in my eyes, and my friend helped me so I didn't feel it was fair for me to eat them all anyway. I'd almost given up at this point, and I wasn't able to sort any for any of my weed dealers. So I had the idea of messaging the guy I had met in the woods. I didn't hear from him for a month, and then one day he messages me back, asking if I still need any. He then very generously gave me 100 Liberty caps for an extremely cheap price, and I was set. At the time I wasn't in the best mental health and was struggling a lot with January blues. I tried a microdose of shrooms, 4 libs, on a weekend as I wasn't feeling very good, and it completely changed my mood and I had the best day in weeks. Excited by what the microdose had done, I decided to spontaneously trip on the same night, even though I had been very depressed the 2 weeks prior. I strongly advise no one to trip unless you have been feeling good in yourself for at least a week or 2 to be safe. Anyway, enough of the backstory. Let's get into the experience. I invited my friend over to trip with me so I wasn't alone, and I also had my mum in the house who was aware I was tripping and was okay with me doing so, as I had researched a lot into safety precautions and had wanted to try it for a long time. This is ironic because I ended up ignoring a lot of the advice I thought I would be following. So at 6:50 I consumed 26 Liberty caps with no plan for after. Another piece of advice I ignored, so we decided to visit another couple mates who lived a few houses down for a joint as we came up. Smoking a joint on the come up was another piece of advice I ignored. However, the come up was amazing. Me and my friend were giggling like girls and genuinely excited for what was to come. I felt like I did on the Golden Teacher trip, where I was childish and fascinated by everything, but more intense. After the joint, we decided to walk back home. As we stepped out of our friend's house, I hear my friend shout, "Wow!" and I turn around and his head is pointing straight up at the sky and his jaw is dropped. I then also do the same thing. We then look at each other at the same time and say we need to go home and smoke a joint while watching the stars. We get home and start rolling the joint inside. I remember feeling so confused and repeating, "I'm so confused." This wasn't a bad feeling though. We put on Favourite Things by Masego, which I had never heard before, and it blew my mind. Felt like I was listening to music for the first time and I could feel all the emotion he puts into the music. Watching the video made me feel like I was there. It looked 3D and felt 5D. It looked more real than reality, which is something I learnt you can't understand without trying the substance yourself. Finally, we rolled the joint after getting distracted by trippy music videos and feeling the music. I've no idea how long it took, as time felt irrelevant, and I'll talk more about how irrelevant time was when I get to the darker side of the story. Anyway, we go into my garden and turn the lights off in the house and stare up at the stars with our joint lit. What I'm about to describe is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. As soon as I look up, I notice the stars and they look like magic dust, twinkling against the infinitely black background. After more hits of my joint and more time staring at the stars, it was like I was looking through the night sky app you can get on your phone. All the stars and constellations were connected together by white lines, and when I looked at them they grew bigger and brighter, just like I was clicking one of the constellations on the app. I looked down from the stars and looked around my garden that was almost completely black. I could just make out my surroundings, but everything was covered with this red and blue netting, like I was in a video game. When I looked back up at the stars, they had changed to blue and red stars, and were twinkling with colour, which blew my mind. We decided to go back inside after the joint, which is where I think the trip started to take a turn for the worse. My friend had eaten less than me, and asked if he could take more. I said of course, and because I'd got them out for him, I also realised I could take more as well. I didn't really think much about it, and I felt like my subconscious was making me eat them. I then started shoving them in my mouth like a savage animal, which I can imagine looked pretty funny. I ate another 19-ish or so mushrooms, as I had already been having such an amazing trip. This, unfortunately, is when my negative thought loops started. My friend had somehow never played Minecraft before, so I thought it would be a great idea to try and teach him mid-trip. This lasted what felt like only 10 minutes, as we were both too confused, and we felt like the outside was more comfortable and less confusing. I started to remember all the advice I'd been told, about feeling good about yourself before a trip, and not smoking before you've come up, etc. I then realised I had ignored all of this advice, and I thought to myself, I've just set myself up for a bad trip. My mate snapped me out of this loop and took my mind off it for a while, and I'm so glad I had a good mate to stop me from entering constant thought loops. We then decided to roll another joint and watch the stars again. We took a while rolling it, of course, and by the time we had rolled it, the other shrooms we had ate were almost due to kick in. I'd forgotten about this, as I was so confused and distracted by all the new sensations. My mum also smokes, and I noticed she was already sat outside smoking. This freaked me out, not because I wasn't allowed to trip. She was fully aware and I had already spoken to her earlier. I felt anxious about talking to her and looking normal while tripping my balls watching the stars. This whole trip I was very confused, but at the same time, I felt like I could think clearer than ever before, and I was almost scared to come back to normal, as the sober mind is not as open and almost feels like tunnel vision. Because I was so confused, I didn't think I could just wait until my mum had finished, so I sat opposite her outside. I couldn't think of anything to say other than, "Hi, how are you?" I decided to look up at the stars as I was tripping more, and that's what I came out for anyway. But to my disappointment, the stars were normal, which, even though the stars normally are amazing, I wanted to see the mind-blowing stars from earlier. More negative thoughts began to creep up and kept escalating and escalating. This is when things got mind-blowing. 1 second I was panicking as my anxiety got stronger and stronger, then the next second I'm transported to another dimension where I have no idea who, where, when, or how long I had been there. I didn't know if I was dead or what was happening at all. I didn't know how I had got there either. This felt similar to my near-death experience where I passed out, fell into a river and woke up underwater. But this time I was in another dimension, where every millisecond I was transported into another room. All of the rooms were all blending together. Similar to data mosh videos, but way smoother and faster. It's impossible for me to describe to you what I saw without actually showing you, but it felt extremely similar to DMT stories where people describe blending through different rooms and then choosing to go back to their reality. After a while of shifting through rooms, I've no idea how long, I shifted into my reality and instantly all my memories came back, and I realised what was going on. I'd fallen to the floor and my mum and friend was trying to help me off the floor. They asked if I was okay, which I replied, "Yes, I'm fine. I just need to go to my room and chill out." I wasn't really fine, but I didn't want to scare my mum and friend, as I was extremely concerned about their emotions. Especially as my mate was also tripping, and my mum was kind enough to trip sit me. I went to my room and thought laying down and watching Rick and Morty would help. It soon became apparent that this wasn't going to work, and I kept sitting up, laying down, trying to sleep, anything that would help me calm down after what had just happened. At this point in the trip I wasn't seeing hardly any visuals anymore, which was fascinating to me as I thought the scary experiences on shrooms would be mainly visual. But after the experience outside I was very scared and these emotions were amplified. Even though I was scared, I was still thinking to myself how fascinating the scary experience was, and I didn't regret the amount I had taken at all. I was getting a lot of revelations about how I act and how to better myself, as well as how I care too much about what people think of me. At the same time, I kept repeating to my friend I'm so confused and that nothing's helping. There's nothing I can do. It's never going to end.
He told me he wasn't really feeling it anymore, which was strange to me as I was freaking out. This did make sense as I had eaten about 20 more than him. The whole trip I was worried about him being scared, and if he would be okay. Luckily he had the best time and kept saying things like, "Life's amazing, I love my girlfriend, I feel so complete in life." However, I was still freaking out in my room, fidgeting and repeating, "Nothing's working, nothing's working." I eventually decided a hug from my mum might make me feel better. So I explained to my friend I'm still very scared and that I was going to hug my mum and I don't care if he thinks I'm weird. I woke my mum up and explained I was still freaking out and asked her for a hug. This definitely helped a bit, but I was still scared, so I asked her if I could stay in the room until I had calmed down. Little did I know, this would feel like an eternity. She asked me to tell my friend that I was staying in here for a while. I explained to him what was going on, and I told him if he's not really feeling it he could go home or feel free to stay, and that I'm sorry if I ruined the night. My mum asked me to wait for her so she could get me a drink. When I was waiting outside her room I felt my anxiety growing again because I was on my own. I then transported into the same warping room dimension from earlier. The exact same thing. I shifted through rooms until I was back to my reality and woke up on the floor again. The feeling of coming back from that dimension is amazing. It's almost like the feeling of breaking out of sleep paralysis, but better. I then sat with my mum as she tried to calm me down. If it wasn't for my mum, I have no idea how this trip would have turned out, but I can't imagine it would have been any fun. I kept getting waves of anxiety where I could feel it building and building. For the first time I was able to warn my mum it was coming, and she would say stuff like, "It's gonna pass, you'll be okay." This really helped me stay out of more negative thought loops. In between the anxiety waves, she would show me photos on her iPad of our dog and other things to ease my mind. I remember one photo in particular was a cartoon of my uncle on the beach. Even though it was just a photo, when I looked it turned into a video. The clouds were moving and the waves were crashing. I kept having nice little experiences like this, and then another wave of anxiety. I asked her how long I had been in the room for, as it had felt like at least 2 to 3 hours. But to my horror, she replied it had only been 20 minutes. This scared me, and I kept repeating, "What do I do? It's never going to end." While I was in this room, I wasn't seeing any visuals, but I was having deep thoughts about life and the universe. I felt like Neo from the Matrix once he's been shown the real world. I was scared to come back to normal, as I thought I'd never be the same again. She then asked me what I watch on YouTube to chill me out, which I laughed and I replied that I watch intense trip stories. She also laughed and said maybe not that then. A couple more anxiety waves came over me until I remembered one of my favourite shows, Peep Show. I requested we put it on, and for the first 5 minutes it was really helping. I remember giggling while watching it and almost forgetting about the waves of anxiety. Suddenly a character called Super Hands walks into the room on the show and I get my last visuals of the trip. His face turns extremely angular. His and Jez's faces start to warp, so I look away as it was starting my anxiety up again. Eventually, after a few episodes of Peep Show, time starts to speed up and I start to return back to the sober mindset. I eventually fall asleep, and to my surprise, in the morning I can remember everything still so vividly. I decide to tell another friend about my story by sending him a 20-minute voice note a couple minutes after waking up. 18 hours later when I'm writing this, I can still remember everything so vividly. Conclusion. I do not regret taking this many at all. I feel like I was meant to take this many, and that I was shown what I needed to see. I've learnt a lot from this, and I'm blessed to be able to bring back everything with me. Even the terrifying experiences. They were also amazing in their own way, and the good experiences were so magical. I was so lucky to be able to experience them. I understand now what people mean when they say there's no such thing as a bad trip. I wouldn't describe this as a bad trip at all. I mean, I wouldn't change anything about it. I plan on trying them again in the future in a better frame of mind, with a better plan and definitely more music. Remember, don't try this just because you've seen a couple YouTube videos and think it sounds cool. It's not a drug, it's a tool. And if you don't believe me, you are going to get a huge kick in the nuts when you try and use it like one. If you listened this far, then thank you. And if you aren't subscribed to Vivec, do it now. Trip responsibly, have a trip sitter for your first trips, and don't take life so seriously. Also, check out Mashed Up Audio UK on Instagram. Thanks Sean for that report, that was so sick, really enjoyed reading that. Quite heartwarming, the connection between you and your mum. Very unique in that way, you don't hear a lot of reports where people are tripping whilst their parents are around. That's usually a recipe for disaster in most of the trip stories I read out. So that was nice and refreshing. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next video.